Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Board of Education, called to order at 4:02 p.m. and open session. Tonight we have requests addressing closed session agenda items. While meetings of the governing board are not public meetings, they are open to the public. Individual speakers will be allowed 3 minutes to address the board on each agenda or non-agenda item, and then the board will limit the total time for public input on each item to 21 minutes as per board bylaw 9322.2. Can we please have Dr. Kirsten Robinson come forward?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Board and Cabinet. Tonight I'm speaking, or this afternoon, I'm speaking on behalf of BTA in regards to an issue that has been very problematic in our district for a very long time, and that's special ed. And it's the bleed over from special ed to general ed, and we're specifically looking at the conflict that we've had with IEPs. Our district progressively has failed students in special ed, and one of the failures to those students is not preparing teachers for IEPs. I taught for 29 years, 23 of them in this district. I have never been told how to handle an IEP or what my role as a teacher is. What I thought it was is showing up for a meeting. I never understood that those boxes apply to me too. So when we're looking at IEP meetings, we're not just looking at an hour of a teacher's time or 2 hours of a teacher's time. We're looking at a teacher also taking on some of the load of serving a special needs student. So that hour of time that often is past our work time is really significant, and compensation for it is necessary. When we look at our contract, the normal on-site day for elementary and our unit members is 7 hours. When we look, and there is an ask for them to stay for parents, and there is an ask for stay for administration and for special ed meetings. And that would be fair if it were equitable, but it's not. In my class, I have 5 kids with special needs who have IEPs, and I have had 2 IEP meetings for every one of those kids. That's 10 hours of meetings in addition to my workday, and I'm also available for my parents. So in the classroom next to me, that teacher might have none or might have 5. So when we're looking at equitable distribution, that's one of the things we also need to be looking at. And when it talks about our meetings, in our contract it says that they will make a good faith effort for us to meet during our workday for our 7 hours. I drive by this district office in the morning, often before I go to work, and that parking lot is empty. And I drive at 5:30, 6 o'clock, that parking lot is empty. So the people in this building don't work beyond their contracted hours, and obviously they have meetings, but that's part of their contract. But that's not in a teacher's contract. It is expected that we go to the meetings, and we want to, but when it's in addition to all the other things that we do, it does need to be compensated. One of the things we need to look at is it starts with inequity. One teacher gets more students or another teacher gets less students, and that leads to discrimination because I'm discriminated against because now you changed my workload. That leads to some form of resistance, which then leads to dissent, which then leads to pushback, which then leads to organization of an effort, which then leads to unification of our membership, which then goes to an appeal and a communication for things to change, which then escalates into a conflict, and that conflict goes on and on and on until there's a tipping point, and then we get resolution, and then there's peace. I'd like to cut that line and figure out, how do you as a board, them as a cabinet, figure out a way for us to not load onto teachers more than what's already expected to them. And when we're moving forward, special ed, once upon a time, I never had special ed students in my class. Now I have 5, 6, I have 3-year-olds. Kids that come, and that 3-year-old, they were having special services. So we're going to see an increase and an increase and increase in that. So please look at that and address it very carefully.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. At this time, the board will recess to closed session. Open session will resume approximately at 6 p.m. Tonight's meeting of the Board of Education was called to order at 4:02 p.m. in open session, and the board then adjourned to closed session at 4:05 p.m. We will now reconvene the meeting in open session at 6:10. Board Clerk.
The topics discussed in closed session were student matters, public employee discipline dismissal release, pending litigation, and labor negotiations. No actions were taken.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Do we have replacement pages tonight? Thank you. Tonight, we have requests for public comments. While meetings of the governing board are not public meetings, they are open to the public. Individual speakers will be allowed 3 minutes to address the board on each agenda or non-agenda item, and the board will limit the total time for public input on each agenda item to 21 minutes as per board bylaw 9322.2. Could we please have Ms. Kim Ashton to the podium?
Kim Ashton, 5882 Wilson Drive, Cypress. Good evening, President Garza, board, Dr. Drotti, staff, and guests. My name is Kim Ashton, and I have been a teacher with BUSD for 27 years. I have been a mentor teacher for the district teachers, for student teachers, as well as held the honor of being the 2021-2022 Teacher of the Year for both Bellflower and LA County. I am here tonight to bring your attention to an increasingly apparent matter. I am referring to our students in TK to second grade who need a classroom setting made for socially and emotionally distressed students. I'm not talking about shy students or students with low IQ. I am referring to students who are academically strong but lack the ability to communicate and express their needs, lack self-control, lack the ability to regulate, harm themselves and others, and so much more. These students feel they can only express themselves and get attention by screaming, crying, hitting, kicking, punching, tearing posters and work off the wall, throwing school supplies, throwing chairs and furniture, biting, spitting, and other actions that can cause harm to teachers, students, staff, and even themselves. I have had all of this happen to me by such a student, and that isn't the only student in need. Every school has multiple students such as this. Starting in third grade, students can be placed in the BEST program in order to succeed, but there is no such program to benefit the students in lower grades. In the last few years, it has become more and more apparent, not only in the Bellflower Unified, but state and nationwide, that we change. Students deserve the chance to learn and develop appropriately in a smaller setting where there is a specialized teacher. Dr. Drotti, you have mentioned that you would like to gain more students in our district. However, we have parents leaving or contemplating leaving due to the fact that their child does not feel safe. I am all for inclusion, but the emotional needs of some students go beyond full-day inclusion. The current state of things is continually putting teachers, students, and other staff in harm's way. The students in a classroom deserve the same right to learn and feel safe as everyone else. However, with a child that needs more than a gen ed teacher, it becomes a difficult setting in which to teach and have students learn. I am asking that you come together to formulate a solution for students that are in need of greater support. They need to be diagnosed in a timely manner and be given a classroom with a teacher who specializes in their needs. This needs to be addressed. Every student deserves the opportunity to learn in the best possible placement in an environment that feels safe and secure. With the current state of things, that is nearly impossible to accomplish. Everyone here only wants what's best for every student. I hope that this drive to give our students everything they deserve ignites the spark of change that this district so very desperately needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ashton. Do we have any amendments to this evening's agenda? Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the amendments? So let's go ahead and move over to Director of Information Technology. Ms. Dina Zabala will lead us in the flag salute this evening. Welcome, Ms. Zabala.
Good evening, Cabinet, board members, and guests. Will you please rise and join me in the flag salute? Put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Presentations. Dr. Drotti, it's time for presentations.
Yes. Thank you. So for tonight, we don't have a lot to present on because we wanted a specific conversation and training on a Brown Act, and also a conflict of interest. This does not mean that the board doesn't know what the Brown Act is, but this is just a regular thing that each board should go through every year, just to remind everyone about what the Brown Act is and not. So it's a practice that most districts take people through. So in a minute, we hired our new general counsel from Oliveira Madrugal Law and Organization. AMLO is the term for it, so I just read the whole thing. But we did invite Rick Oliveira and his team. He can introduce team members to come present on this presentation, and this should be a pretty good discussion for the entire community to understand what the Brown Act is and what conflict of interests are.
Hi, Madam President, members of the board, staff, and members of the public. My name is Rick Olivares, and I'm one of the partners at Olivares Madruga. Tonight, we're going to provide you all with a kind of an overview of the Brown Act and also on some of the conflict of interest and ethic statutes that exist. Doing the presentation is going to be my partner, Richard Padilla, and Susie Altamirano couldn't be here, so Stephanie decided to fill in for her. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to them. Thank you.
And may I just gently remind our board members that we will be giving questions at the end of the presentation, and we have a roll call in which we'll do that.
Is that the best thing, or from your experience?
You know,
it's a very long presentation.
Madam President, members of the board, the presentation we're going to do tonight is actually sort of a compressed version of the AB 1234 training, which you may have heard of, but which actually technically doesn't currently apply to districts. So it'll be a lot more compressed, and I think in the interest of time, it would probably be better to reserve questions towards the end, or unless you feel you really need a point of clarification. But
thank you for clarifying that.
So as Rick said, I'm Richard Padilla. I've been working in the municipal law field or in the public agency law field for about 20 years. Really enjoy it. I've done a fair number of these Brown Act trainings. This is my colleague, Stephanie Arachiga, who's been doing a whole lot of these trainings in the last few years. So tonight we're going to start off with a discussion of the Brown Act and some of the other transparency laws, and then we'll round it out with conflicts of interest. So I'll yield the floor to Stephanie.
Good evening, Madam President, honorable board members. Okay, so we kind of covered most of this already, but we'll be going over some best practices and how to avoid legal problems with regard to the Brown Act and conflicts of interest. This is just a quick reminder to please silence your phones at this time and to keep all questions to the end. As Richard pointed out, this is a quick summation of AB 1234 ethics training. Effective January 1st, 2025, state law will require local agency officials, including members of school district, to complete 2 hours of ethics training every year. That is not currently enforced, and that's why this is not the full 2 hours. We're sparing you that because it's pretty long. So as a general overview, we'll be covering ethics principles, transparency laws, personal financial gain, fair process, and perks of office. Starting off with ethics principles. Just briefly, ethics laws versus ethics. The law is often the starting point in determining what is ethical. The law is what we must do. However, ethics are what we should do. And just a reminder that just because something is legal does not make it ethical. California law promotes ethics through requiring public disclosure. That's covered under the Public Records Act, prohibiting certain actions, and punishing violations, all of which will be covered in this presentation. Some general questions to ask yourself when posed with a question whether ethical or something's ethical and or illegal is to go through these 3 steps. Does it comply with state and local rules? Is it consistent with my personal values? How will it look in the newspaper or on social media? As we all know, we live in a day and age where social media is major for public opinion. The best way whenever you're posed with any sort of question is, if this is posted on my Instagram, am I comfortable with this being tied to me for the rest of my life? This is in regard to quotes you may make or even actions you may take. So the transparency laws that we'll be covering include the Brown Act, which is the open meeting laws, the Political Reform Act, which covers reporting economic interest, and the Public Records Act. Starting off with the Brown Act, which is the bulk of this, Government Code Section 54943 says all meetings of a legislative body of a local agency shall be open and public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the legislative body. In this presentation, we'll cover what is considered a legislative body, does open and public mean, what is a meeting, and who should be permitted to attend. Some goals of the Brown Act are to curb misuse of the democratic process by public bodies through secret legislation, and to ensure the public's right to attend and participate in meetings of local legislative bodies. So starting at the basis, what is a legislative body? This is governing bodies of local agencies, for example, a school board, commissions, committees, or other bodies of a local agency that were created by ordinance, resolution, whether permanent or temporary, decision-making or advisory, and standing committees that have either continuing subject matter jurisdiction or a meeting schedule fixed by a charter, ordinance, resolution, or formal action of a legislative body. Also, well, we do want questions at the end. If I'm going too fast, please feel free to tell me to slow down. Okay, so now that we've covered what is a legislative body, next we have what is considered a meeting. And a legislative body is very cut and dry, whereas a meeting has a little bit more nuances to it, because something that was not meant to be a meeting can easily turn into one. So just the basic definition, a meeting occurs whenever a majority of the members of a legislative body congregate at the same time and place to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body. You guys are 5 members of a board, 3 of you getting together, just meeting up by coincidence at a local grocery store, start discussing matters within your subject matter jurisdiction is enough to qualify as a meeting and is enough to be a Brown Act violation. Okay, so we're starting off with what to look out for. So beware of serial meetings. The Brown Act prohibits a majority of the members of a legislative body, here that would be 3, from using a series of communication of any kind, directly or through intermediaries, to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body. Such meetings deprive the public of an opportunity for meaningful participation in the legislative body decision-making. So this could be something, again, as simple as meeting up at the grocery store by accident, a text message chain that has 3 of you on it discussing anything in your subject matter jurisdiction. This does not mean you cannot discuss outside of meetings. It just is, be careful what you're discussing and make sure it's simple things like the weather, sports, anything that's not within your subject matter jurisdiction. That's okay. That would qualify as sports still. So again, just to cover it again, unlawful serial meetings can occur through telephone, email chains, text messages. This includes direct messages on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. If it's a quorum, it's enough to qualify as a meeting, and it's enough to be a Brown Act violation. This can also involve contact with the majority of members through staff or other individuals. Staff is also made aware of being careful that they don't send out an email communication to a majority of you, which requires somebody to respond, and then we have a Brown Act violation. I know staff's usually pretty good about BCCing to avoid this issue, but if for some reason you do get an email, just be careful with replying all. Okay, an example of a serial meeting is a daisy chain, and that's when member A contacts member B contacts member C, and so on until a quorum and collective concurrence is established. Again, member A just reached out to member B because of something they wanted to discuss. Member B then follows up with member C, and that's a quorum. Member A may not have had an intention of violating the Brown Act, but once member B involved member C, that's where we have a Brown Act violation. A general rule with this is just be really mindful as to who you're discussing what with. I always ask, how is this going to be used? Be very careful, again, who you share your opinions with, because it's very simple to end up in Brown Act violation territory. Another example is a hub and spoke. So a staff member contacts each member of a legislative body one-on-one for a decision on a proposed action and reveals each member's decision to one another. That, again, is a Brown Act violation because we would have a quorum at some point that would be aware of the other's decision on a specific matter. informal gatherings. So this is more with regard to that example that I gave in the grocery store earlier. Use caution when socializing with other members of the board outside of an open and notice meeting. For example, after a school board meeting, 3 members of the board decide to have dinner. The Brown Act does not prohibit this, but it does mean that city business cannot be discussed or transacted. Okay, so now that we've covered what qualifies as a meeting, we will now go into the specific types of meeting that are covered under the Brown Act, and that is regular meetings, special meetings, adjourned meetings, and emergency meetings. Regular meetings are routine, regularly scheduled meetings held on the same day of the week and time, and certain actions can only be made at regular meetings. We are currently at a regular meeting right now. A special meeting can occur on any date or time with 24 hours notice. The presiding officer or a majority of the board may call a special meeting. There is no violation of the Brown Act when 3 or more members meet or communicate simply to agree to call a special meeting or agree on a date and time for the special meeting. However, just be mindful that you don't discuss your opinions as to what's going to be on the special meeting, and then we're not in Brown Act violation. But if somebody needs to call one and they're like, hey, are you free Tuesday, 12 o'clock? That's not a Brown Act violation, even if there is a quorum of you on that chain. Okay, we also have adjourned meetings under the Brown Act. This is any regular or special meeting may be adjourned to a time and place specified in a written notice or order of adjournment. An adjournment may be ordered if less than a quorum is present. So if we don't have quorum, we would have to adjourn our meeting. A copy of the order or notice of adjournment must be conspicuously posted on or near the door of the place where the regularly adjourned regular, special, or adjourned special meeting was held within 24 hours of the adjournment. A regular adjourned meeting is considered a regular meeting. There are also emergency meetings, and the Brown Act defines 2 different types of emergencies, an emergency and a dire emergency. Except for noticing requirements, emergency meetings are conducted like a special meeting. So some exceptions to the meeting definition. Individual contacts. For example, 2 of you are able to text message, communicate as much as you want, even about stuff in your subject matter jurisdiction, because that's not a quorum. Conferences, all 5 of you can attend a conference without any sort of Brown Act violation, so long as you are not discussing subject matter jurisdiction amongst yourselves. Community meetings, you are all free to attend the same city council meetings, share your opinion to the city council. That's not a Brown Act violation. You're also free to attend other legislative meetings, so planning commission, also standing committees, and then social or ceremonial events like weddings, birthdays, funerals. All that is okay, so long, again, as no business is transacted or discussed. So we talked briefly about social media earlier, but AB 992 temporarily amends the Brown Act to address social media up until January 1st, 2026, and this prohibits officials from responding directly to any communication that is made, posted, or shared on social media by another member of the same legislative body regarding matters in the legislative body's jurisdiction. That is the crucial part to this. It's with regard to matters in your jurisdiction. So this can include sharing posts, commenting, or even using digital icons like the like, heart, the haha emoji. Any of that would qualify. While this is only temporarily, we do expect something permanently to come before this expires. So it's just something that we need to be mindful of going forward. Some social media considerations and recommendations from us are, it's a great way to interact with residents, but just be mindful that it is subject to Public Records Act, a Public Records Act request. So just briefly, social media and the First Amendment. Knight First Amendment Institute versus Trump. The U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York held that by holding out his Twitter account as an avenue for public engagement and by using it to release major policy announcements, former President Trump made his account a designated public forum. So this applies to you in the fact that if at any point you turn any of your personal social media, Facebook, Instagram, anything, and you start using it to provide school board updates, you are making your social media a public forum, and now all of this applies. Under the First Amendment, state actors like former President Trump cannot block speakers from accessing a designated public forum because of their political view. This means if somebody leaves a comment that you don't really like, if it's something personal and you've already made it a public forum, you cannot delete it. So if you truly want to keep your social media page private, don't share city business, don't share school board business, and engage with residents on your personal page. Some social media do's and don'ts: do not delete or hide posts, do not block someone from your page, and do not delete public comments. Again, this is only with regard to social media that you've made a designated public forum. If you've never shared anything school board related, none of this applies to you. And this is just another quick reminder that to avoid sending emails to the whole body, be careful when replying to emails and think very carefully before you send an email, as you don't know how it will be shared and who it may be forwarded to. Okay, now that we've covered what is a legislative body, what is a meeting, now we go to location of meetings. With a few exceptions, meeting must be held within the district's jurisdiction. A meeting may not be held in any facility that prohibits admittance of any person based on race, religion, color, national origin, ancestry, or sex, which is inaccessible to disabled persons, or where members of the public are required to pay. A lot of these rules were relaxed under the COVID-19 executive orders relating to teleconference meetings. A legislative body may not take action upon or discuss any item not listed on the agenda except in limited circumstances. So this is the no discussion, no action rule. Just be mindful when staying on track. Luckily, you have a great legal counsel that will remind you if you step out of line at any point. Some exceptions to the no discussion, no action: brief responses to a statement or question from the public, questions to staff for clarification of a matter based on public comment, brief announcements or reports on members or staff's own activities, or requests for staff to report back at a future meeting concerning any matter. There, in addition to everything that qualifies to be a meeting and what needs to be on the agenda, each agenda also has posting requirements. So the time and dates for all meetings must be noticed, and the agenda must be prepared, providing a brief general description of all matters to be discussed or considered. The agenda must be posted 72 hours before the meeting, and the meeting must be held within the agency's jurisdiction. That's for general meetings. Then for special meetings, the agenda must be posted 24 hours before and may be called by a majority of the body or the presiding officer. So I briefly mentioned that rules were relaxed under the COVID-19 executive orders. One of those was the teleconferencing. So prior to March of 2020, teleconferencing was only able to be used as long as a quorum of the body participated from within the local agency's jurisdiction, and the agenda identified each teleconference location, that the location was accessible to the public and with technology being available, and that votes were done by roll call. However, come March 2020, this was not very accessible. This was not possible anymore. So we had a few different options for teleconferencing. This is, however, referred to as the Brown Act traditional rule, and it's still on the books and it's still available, has been available for pretty much as long as I can remember. And we have our first hypothetical. A member on vacation wants to participate in a meeting of the legislative body and vote by cellular phone from her car while driving on the Big Island of Hawaii under traditional Brown Act teleconferencing laws. May she? Does anybody want to elaborate why they're not able to under the traditional teleconferencing?
I'm going to take a stab at it. I think because it's not like agendized, or it's not told before the 74 hours or 72 hours where that person's going to be located. Does that have something to do with it?
A little bit, but under the traditional Brown Act, so long as if you knew you were going to be out of town, you would let the district know, please include my location as a teleconferencing location. So if she decided to change that up that day, that would be she would be unable to do so. But, well, everyone got it right. It is no, but it's under the traditional Brown Act. She was not able to participate or vote because she was not in a noticed and posted teleconference location. If she was in Hawaii on the Big Island, she wanted to participate from her hotel, all she had to do was make sure that the hotel conference room was posted on the agenda and it was open to any members of the public. Granted, there's probably going to be very few people trying to participate from Hawaii, but that's the way everyone used teleconference prior to March of 2020. However, now we have AB 2449, which is it's a lot less work and a little bit easier for everyone to use. This began at the beginning of this year, and it allowed local governments to conduct virtual meetings without a declared state of emergency, because that was required under AB 361, which we won't cover since it's seldomly used now and it will expire at the end of the year. It requires audio and visual streaming and public comment to be in real time. Board members who wish to participate remotely must do so either for a just cause or emergency circumstance reason. The bill is very careful and specific with what it considers a just cause and emergency circumstance. I could just, right off the top of my head, just cause is something like you got sick the day of, your child got sick, your spouse got sick, you're out of town at a conference. Emergency circumstances also relate to caretaking for someone, again, but in very specific circumstances. Each member is allowed a maximum of 2 just cause exceptions per calendar year, and the total remote participation may not exceed 3 consecutive months or 20% of total meetings. Just cause requires a quick, brief update at the beginning of the meeting just for the member to say, I need to participate remotely, I'm sick, and that's all they have to say, or my daughter's sick, something like that. An emergency circumstance exception requires action by the board. The board has to approve your remote participation, and if for some reason they were not to approve, you are not able to participate. You also have to have your audio and visual on at all times when participating remotely under AB 2449, and you have to state at the beginning of the meeting if anybody in the room with you is over the age of 18 and what their relationship is to you. This will sunset on January 1st, 2026, but again, we anticipate something more permanent will come prior to then. So just briefly covering what options we have currently through January 1st, 2024, we have the traditional Brown Act teleconferencing rules. If there's a declared state of emergency, we would have AB 361, or we would have AB 2449. From January 1st, 2024 through January 1st, 2026, we have the traditional Brown Act teleconferencing, and we have AB 2449. And then after January 1st, we only have traditional pre-COVID teleconferencing. Okay, so again, we're going down the definition of a meeting, and we covered that, and now we know where meetings can be held, and we're covering the public participation aspect. All meetings must be open to the public, and all persons must be permitted to attend. There must be a public comment section, and members of the public must be provided an opportunity to address the legislative body as to any matter within the body's jurisdiction and on any item on the agenda before or during its consideration. Comments for special meetings, the comments are limited to 2 items on the agenda, and just a reminder that this is not a Q&A opportunity. The board may establish rules for orderly conduct of business to avoid disruption of meetings, such as establishing policies to limit the time allowed for speakers to address the legislative body, shortening the time to allow for every member of the public to speak. For example, if there's a specific meeting where the room is full, there's hundreds of people, and you want to cut the speaking time just for that specific meeting, just to ensure that everyone's able to give their public comment, you can. Prohibiting the use of devices that create noise or flash, and requiring that signs not be displayed that prevent others from viewing the proceedings. If somebody in the front row is holding up a sign above their head and is preventing everyone behind them, we would just ask that they pull the sign down. We're not asking that they remove the sign, we just ask that they don't interfere with others' ability to view the meeting. Okay, so now we're on to closed session. So I know this whole time I'm saying everything has to be open and in front of the public, but there are a few exceptions. Public closed session allows for discussion and action behind closed doors on certain specific subject matters where it is the public interest to preserve confidentiality. The agendas must include the description of matters to be discussed in closed session. There's disclosure of confidential information acquired in closed session is prohibited. Only the legislative body acting as a whole may agree to divulge confidential closed session information, and the consequences of disclosing confidential information includes injunctive relief, disciplinary action, or referral to a grand jury. These are briefly some of the permissible topics in closed session. That includes conference with legal counsel, general employment and discipline matters.
Can you go back there again just real quick?
Of course.
Just give everybody an opportunity to see what those are. This is an important part, so I want to.
Okay, I can go over each one. I also know I was losing my voice yesterday, so spare you guys the bad horse-sounding voice. Apologies. So just briefly, Conference of Legal Counsel, this can include existing litigation, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation, general employment and discipline matters. This can include appointment and employment issues, employee performance evaluations, employee discipline and dismissal, and complaints or charges against an employee. There are also reporting requirements associated with closed session, which I heard our clerk do at the beginning of the meeting. Government Code Section 54957.1 prescribes the reporting requirements for a closed session, which can differ depending on the circumstances, but they typically include the board members who are present, the action taken, and the vote or abstention on that action. So now that we've gone into detail as to what the Brown Act is, we want to lay out the potential Brown Act violations should the Brown Act be violated. So this would include criminal sanctions, civil remedies, or penalties, so court costs and reasonable attorney's fees. Some practical tips. Of course. Okay, I'll read through it again. So a violation would include any sort of quorum of the board meeting to discuss anything within the district's subject matter jurisdiction. This could include a staff member releasing information to each member of the board where at some point there's a quorum that is aware of the other's thoughts. This could include blocking someone on your social media that you've already made a public forum. It's basically everything that I just said. Don't do any of it. I think Richard wants to add to that.
Yeah, where it also comes up a lot and most frequently is disclosing closed session information. When you are in closed session, you have a duty to maintain the privilege. You hold the privilege as a body, not as individuals. So that's a very common or somewhat common violation. And also just frankly not adhering to the noticing and agenda requirements. So the public has a right to know what's going to be on an agenda, what you're going to be talking about. They need to have an opportunity to speak at appropriate times in the agenda. So failures to do that also can constitute Brown Act violations.
And some practical tips to avoid those violations. The Brown Act does not require board members to stop engaging with the public, but it does prevent them from learning about other members' perspectives to the public before meeting or discussing agency business with someone of the public. Warn them that you cannot discuss the other officials' views. This is another example of how the Brown Act may be violated. If you're meeting with somebody and they disclose to you, oh, I spoke to these two members and they said this, that is now a Brown Act violation because you would be the third, you're a quorum, and now you're aware as to how the other two are voting. The First Amendment is a highly protected right, so err on the side of allowing speech, be prepared to receive harsh comments, and allow the public to use their 3 minutes as they wish. This avoids escalating the issue and potentially drawing additional criticism. Okay, we have our last hypothetical, I believe. Reverend Brimstone regularly comments at the school board meetings because the town crier reporter always attends and he wants publicity. During the comment period, one meeting, he accuses a board member, he being the town crier, accuses a board member of being a sinner because he disagrees with the board on certain policies. The clerk turns off the microphone at the board's president request. What mistake, if any, was made?
Yeah, the board member wouldn't be able to turn off that mic because even though they don't like what that person is saying, they still have a right to say it.
Exactly. So we cannot prohibit public criticism of policies, procedures, programs, or services of the agency or the omission of legislative body. Expressions of support or opposition to matters before the agency constitute protected speech. The legislative body may not preclude speech based on its content and may adopt content-neutral restrictions such as time limits on public comments only. Okay, and I believe I'm done. And, oh, actually, no, sorry. This is still my section.
Process check-wise, I just want to revisit whether there's a design for this thing to really go slow enough for you guys to ask questions. I want to check to see if we want to pause for you guys to ask some of these questions, or because if we go through the whole thing, are you guys going to be able to remember what to ask, or do we need to ask along the way?
Yeah, we've covered a kind of a condensed area regarding the Brown Act and public meeting laws. So, I mean, this might be a good time to entertain any questions you may have about
Well, I've got notes here, so I'll be ready by the end of the meeting.
Okay. If anybody has questions, we can do them at the end of each section. I think maybe that would be best. No?
We can ask questions.
Well, I guess I've got one question. I was going to say it for the end of the meeting, but bring it closer. So in that, there was a portion of the presentation where we talked about having virtual meetings and the opportunity for people in a virtual meeting to call in live to a board meeting and give their public comments live. I wonder if it's possible, and I think this is something that one of my colleagues on the board had mentioned during one of his board member updates about at an in-person meeting where the board is here in person, having people call in to give public comments. I know some people have issues getting physically to the district office, and so I wondered if that's a possibility or something you've seen before in the past of at an in-person meeting having people actually call in virtually.
That is definitely a possibility. There's no issue with regard to the Brown Act because that has to do with public comment. So long as the room has a capability for them to view the meeting and participate live time, there's no issue.
Yeah, and I would just add to that with the recent changes by AB 2449, it is highly recommended that you pretty much plan every meeting as if you were going to allow the public to participate remotely for the simple reason that under AB 2449, any one of you can call literally at the last minute and say, I'm not feeling sick, I have a child care obligation, I can't be here. In which case, then your participation remotely compels the district to also simultaneously allow the public to participate remotely as well, usually by call-in and also being able to view it. So in many ways, I would strongly urge that you adopt that as a practice now because as a practical matter, you will never know when you'll need to invoke that.
Yeah, because I know currently, I'm not sure if it's still currently, but I have attended a few city council meetings for Bellflower, and I do believe they have like a call-in option, even though the city council is physically present on their dais. So if that's something we could look into, that'd be cool. And thank you.
I have a question also. Is this a board? I mean, is this a Brown Act violation? Say, for instance, if an individual representing or maybe not representing another organization wants to talk to a board member, and we have two board dates, so they talk to two board members. If they then want to speak to another board member, that would be either 3 or even 4. Is that a Brown Act violation? Because, the board members may not even know. And if it is a violation, how could the board members prevent themselves from being caught up and being caught in that trap?
Yeah, I think what you're describing is kind of the setup for a serial meeting, kind of the hub and spoke. So the idea there is that 3 council members are not talking, or board members in this case, are not talking to each other directly, but there is an intermediary who is receiving information and input from at least 3 of you, sharing your information so that essentially some quorum of you is arriving at a decision outside of the context of a board meeting. So what's really important in that scenario is if the conduit is actually sharing the opinions. Oh, board member Armstrong says she's going to take this position. Board member Stewart, how do you feel about that? Are you in on that? Board member Garza, the 2 of them are really a go for this position. If we get you on board, we can get it passed. That suddenly becomes a serial meeting. My recommendation when you are dealing with people, that you are public officials, you have people lobbying you every day for a variety of reasons, but you don't live in a fishbowl. You are part of being a public official is trying to get public input, trying to understand your community, trying to understand the interests that come before the board and how they jive with the public interest here. What you want to, though, tell people when you are speaking with them is it's a one-way conversation. You want to listen. You want to absorb as much information as possible, but you will hold judgment until at such time as you can appear before a public body in the context of a meeting. Once you're on the dais and there's members of the audience here, feel free to express what your feelings are, and you certainly have an opportunity at that point to deliberate and discuss and even, make compromises as well.
So just to clarify, it is okay if an individual or from an organization or whatever gets 2 members and then 2 members, as long as we don't discuss together.
As long as you don't give them your opinion that they can then go share with the other members.
So we should really just be the ear and only an ear.
Yes.
exactly
And
Okay.
avoid discussions until you're in open
Okay.
meetings. Are there any other questions?
No, I was going to ask the same thing just to clarify. We can still meet with people who want to give us information.
Of course.
I have a couple. I was taking some notes, but I'm just afraid like if you're going to get to it. So if it's in later in the presentation, just let me know. Are we going to touch on the difference between Brown Act and Green Act meetings?
I don't believe that's in this presentation, right?
Yeah, Green Act probably is a bit beyond the scope of this presentation, but if
Okay.
you want to have a separate conversation about that.
That'd be great. Next question. Okay, in a daisy, because I find a lot with Brown Act stuff, it's how do you hold people accountable to those? Because sometimes it's pretty gray sometimes. So like in a daisy chain, for example, if member A talks to member B and member B talks to member C, only member B knows what they did, right? So member A and member C. So is the accountability with member B or is it all 3?
The accountability is with all 3, because at some point in the conclusion of that chain, 3 or more of you are going to know how the other is going to be interacting on there. So it's really important at that point if you have a colleague who wants to talk to you not only about where they stand on a particular position or how they intend to vote, but if they're now trying to share with you conversations they've had with other people, I think that's a point at which you want to just politely decline the conversation and just say we can deliberate. We can discuss that when we're at the meeting. So.
Great. And next is, what category of meeting would a study session or a retreat fall into?
Well, generally speaking, study sessions, you're discussing business, so that would technically be regarded as a board meeting. So it would be open to the public. You would have an opportunity for the public to comment. I know sometimes that runs contrary to why you have study sessions or retreats, because you want to have an opportunity to have a little more of a let your hair down opportunity to speak. But unfortunately, because you are together deliberating and making decisions on city business or school board business, you do have to agendize it. You have to allow the public to be there and at least hear how the deliberation goes. Now, there are other varieties of meetings, as Stephanie went over, that don't qualify. I mean, if you go to conferences where you're not leading the discussion, somebody else is, and you're just there as a listener. Yeah.
For like a retreat, you would still be in the same category as regular meeting?
Right.
In theory, the study session could be on a not regular meeting day, so that would be a special meeting, right? Like if you have it on a Saturday, a study session.
Right. So,
that'd be a special meeting.
Yeah, I think, so what we're saying is you can have it on a non-regular board meeting day, but it would still count as a meeting within the meaning of the Brown Act that you would have to agendize and go to the public.
Thank you. Also, sorry, I have one more. I had 2 more. Okay, so what do you say? So the I think if a board member were to violate Brown Act, that's pretty clear. Like, say if they release, closed session information, it's pretty clear that that board member is accountable. But when you mention say the posting of board meeting with 72 hours, who is held accountable to that? Like, what would that violation look like? Is it the whole board is violating Brown Act? Is it?
Well, it would be the institution, which technically I guess would be the board as an institution, not you as individuals. But still, somebody could say, the board has stopped posting agendas, or they post one-word agendas and we have no idea what they're talking about, or they're posting their agendas 5 minutes before the meeting and we're not getting time. They would hold the city, the board and the body accountable for that.
But if a violation of Brown Act is punishable by a misdemeanor, that would be...
And fine as well. So.
And fines?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of...
Yeah, or you can too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's... Yeah. So a violation could be either from one member or the entire board as a collective.
Right. And as Rick kindly reminded me, most of the time the Brown Act is somewhat merciful in that if you are in violation, if you made a decision without complying with all of the noticing requirements or the agenda requirements, what the Brown Act will simply command is that at the soonest opportunity that you reconvene as a body, agendize it properly, deliberate on it properly, and all is forgiven at that point. It's when you don't do that after the specified time period that then you're running the risk of some problems. So.
Thank you.
I kind of had the same questions, but I just want to circle back to that one more time. My question was the same as who is in violation of the Brown Act. So as a board member, I need to basically check up on everything that's done to make sure everything's posted, all of that, or I can be punished, basically, or given consequences, right?
Well, I mean, you all as members of the board have a fiduciary duty to ensure that proper practices are being followed. Now, there's issues about defense and tendering, which are kind of beyond the scope here. I mean, I would suffice to say nobody's going to put you individually in jail unless there was some egregious conspiracy to violate the Brown Act. But I think if it was just some sort of negligent oversight, it would really just be a question of you remedying it or somebody filing an injunction that would then command you guys to start complying with the Brown Act.
And I kind of had the same question. If I'm only talking to one board member, and that's the only board member I ever talk to, and then that person goes and talks to someone, I can be held accountable?
Well, there is some fact sensitivity to that. I mean, if you unwittingly spoke to somebody who then shared an opinion with somebody else and then shared it with a third party, I think you could be deemed sort of an innocent party there.
Okay.
If you start receiving that, if you're willingly receiving the feedback and agreeing with it, then that's a problem.
But absolutely, if I only talk to one board member and nobody else, I'll never be in that situation, correct?
Right.
Okay, thank you. And then, my next question is, I know I've read somewhere where we talked about the mic being, of the hypothetical of him calling, but there is instances where someone speaking can be so, obnoxious where you are allowed to turn that mic off. Can you explain that difference to me, please?
Let me get you started on this. So, as Stephanie said, when people come here at the podium, they are not under any obligation to be kind. And the First Amendment and the Supreme Court offers a lot of latitude for people to say very unkind and hurtful things as long as it's arguably within the subject matter jurisdiction of this board. There is some debate about, we have a particular city where there's a gentleman who comes and his sole purpose is to curse and say the most vulgar, vile things you can imagine. And by your smile, I think some of you probably know I will not name him. I will not do him that honor. However, you have to be careful how you approach it because, arguably he's clever enough to know to sort of interweave his vulgarity with something that sort of sounds relevant to the conversation. So what I try to encourage people to do is, sometimes it's better to just let people go, get them off as soon as possible. Oftentimes when you engage with them, you're really just kind of amplifying what they want to say, and you're prolonging their time at the podium because now they're engaging in a back and forth with you. What you can say, though, afterwards or before is to say, especially if it's somebody who's a regular, you can say, you're going to hear some things tonight that are protected under the First Amendment, but, we want you and the rest of the body and the rest of the public to know that they don't reflect our opinions and we find them vile and we repudiate them. You're well within your right to have an opinion condemning the people who speak here, but they do, for the most part, have a right to speak. Unless you can tie their behavior to disruptiveness, actual disruptiveness, it's very you run the risk of violating somebody's First Amendment rights. So I think that's the key thing to keep in mind there.
And I had one last question. Thank you. As far as social media, if you have, a lot of time when you're campaigning, you have two separate pages. If you have posted something on your personal page that's media related, now it becomes public where you cannot block people, correct?
Yeah, the second you make it a designated public forum, you're in the whole realm of the First Amendment and you cannot block.
Okay, now on your personal social media, if you go back and you delete those posts and now it is just yours, can you delete the whole entire page and start over so that you cannot be harassed?
That becomes problematic because then you're potentially deleting public records because now you've discussed board business and you've created a public record which can only be destroyed in compliance with whatever policy you have for the public.
Okay, can I ask a different question then? Can you define to me what board business is? If you're discussing, if I just post a picture on the dais, that's board business?
Possibly not, but I mean anything that talks about how what the programming for the district is, who you contract with, any sort of political or election related issues. It's pretty broad. So I mean it's broad almost to the point of being exhaustive. Maybe a little narrower since you're a school district and you're not talking about utilities or necessarily or running elections for the entire city or not, but. You have to be very careful, and it's very important, as Stephanie said, that you separate your public profile from your private profile and keep your private profile private so that you don't have to open it up to the.
Really quickly, just to address, going back to the whole deleting that one, you could, in theory, stop using it, don't delete it, and then just make a new one and keep that one private. Mm-hmm. That would probably be the best thing we would recommend, because then anybody could leave comments, but you're not engaging, you're not doing anything, just don't delete it. That's where it's a little bit.
As far as that goes on that topic, it says do not delete public comments under extremely specific circumstances. What would be some of those circumstances? I know it says extremely specific, but like if a board member senses danger or harassment, could they if they feel like could they delete those, or could they unfriend somebody who is harassing, or they feel like that person could be a danger?
Yeah, I think that's one where you probably need to work in consultation with legal counsel, because there are some fine points that you need to be sensitive to. I would say images that are completely obscene, that that don't really have any sort of business related value. Possibly something you can delete, but I think it can be very tricky, and I think it's just one of those things where you probably need to consult with legal counsel before you make any rash decisions on that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Should I repeat all that, or are we good? Okay, all right. So I probably know the answer to this, but and the board knows this too. But this is more or less this whole thing is about really educating the community as well as just the board and all that. So, superintendent has a town hall. Volatile situation. Everybody's intense. I speak obviously, and one board member speaks, another board member speaks, and another board member speaks on that. In that same town hall about an issue we're dealing with. Is that considered a violation there? I don't know. We're talking about
if you've organized the town hall as essentially a meeting, then there shouldn't be any problem with back and forth. Now, if the town hall is intended really as a forum for the public to speak and not for you to deliberate on anything, my advice on that would be to, again, be present, listen, take it all in, but try to keep your comments to zero if at all possible.
President Garza, did you have a question before I ask my next one?
Well, I just want to make sure that I get all of our absent board members' questions as well that she had provided for us, if that's possible. Okay, thank you. So one of the first questions she had are, what are the boundaries between unions and boards? So I'm not sure exactly what.
Well, I'll assume that what she's talking about are engagement with collective bargaining groups, maybe, perhaps.
I'm thinking this probably has to do with the closed session items. Sometimes we do labor negotiations and things like that. Mm-hmm. So if we're in the middle of a case in labor negotiations, and a union member, you mentioned earlier, lobbies a board member to explain the situation. It's a closed session item. Right. What does the board member do in that situation?
This comes up very frequently. It's not an uncommon scenario. Members of collective bargaining units and their representatives, they have a right to lobby you to explain what they feel the issues are, to sort of lobby for how they think you should vote. Again, similar to what we said earlier, you want that to be a one-way conversation as much as possible. I mean, you can be polite, and you don't need to sort of necessarily be distant, but try to have it more about you gathering information than you sharing what your personal positions are at that point. And absolutely, you cannot share what the back and forth was and what the strategizing was when you were in closed session, because you as individuals don't hold that privilege. The body holds that privilege. The only way you could possibly do that is if the board made the decision to delegate that authority to you. They made you the lead negotiator for some reason, and you were required to interact with their representatives as well. It's also important to note as board members that, and this is maybe a little off topic, but you have an obligation to deal with the representatives of employees. You cannot, as a board member, approach the rank and file membership and try to persuade them to vote a certain way. They have duly elected union representatives, and you as board members are required to funnel your negotiations and your proposals through them. So you want to make sure you don't commit an unfair labor practice in doing that as well.
So just to confirm, we are able to meet with them under those rules too, but just make sure that we are not, again, expressing any opinions and not giving any information.
Yeah, and I think being upfront with people right off the bat about why you cannot offer opinion is important, because I think a lot of times people do want you to make some sort of verbal commitment, or at the very least, they want to feel you out for what your position is. And, you're all adults, you know how to be diplomatic. I think you can be polite and gracious about it without, having to give up anything.
Thank you. There's 3 questions, so this is the second one. Could you please clearly define board member roles, president, vice president, and clerk?
That is actually not really a Brown Act question. I think that's more of just your own internal policies. But, just generally speaking, Robert's Rules of Order, as the president, you are the presiding officer of the meeting. You carry the gavel. You kind of guide the discussion. You have what was the other position you?
She asks about vice president and clerk.
Vice president, sort of the equivalent of a vice mayor. You occupy, you discharge the duties of the president if the president's not present. Clerk, I would imagine, is involved in the record keeping and making sure that accurate records of your discussions and your deliberations are kept. So.
Thank you. And last question. Identify the boundaries to where board members stop and the district picks up actions and responsibilities.
That one's a little, that's a little vague.
I think this probably has to do with just operations of the duties of the board versus the duties of staff.
Okay, I think I know what this question is. I think this is a question that comes up in cities a lot. So you have a designated superintendent. Your superintendent is like your CEO. It's the person you hire to discharge and make sure that the operation of the organization runs properly, but in accordance with the broader goals that you set, with the big picture you set. You are the policymakers. You set the course of where the district wants to go. The superintendent and staff's job is to figure out how to get you where to go, and our job is to make sure you can get there without getting in trouble, or at least in compliance with the law. Where cities and other public agencies tend to have problems are when individual board members maybe want to usurp the prerogatives of the superintendent and start directing employees directly, or bypassing him or her in their executive capacity. It really is important that to the extent that you have issues with line staff, that you direct those through your management staff, and then you hold your management staff accountable if you feel those issues aren't being addressed.
So just as an example, if I wanted to say we wanted to have a town hall meeting, I wouldn't go directly to the superintendent's staff and tell them, hey, agendize a town hall meeting.
Hey, guess what, guys? Drop everything you're doing. We're doing a town hall. Don't worry, I'll talk to the superintendent. That's a big no-no. You can't do that. Yeah.
It would have to go through him.
Yeah.
Perfect. Those are all the questions from our board member.
I'm gonna wait. I was gonna ask a question about a town hall meeting, but I'll forego that.
I actually do. I'm sorry. These are my personal ones. I forgot mine.
Sorry.
My turn. So one of the questions I have was, oh gosh, I forgot. Never mind.
Maybe I could fill some time for you so you can catch up. I went quickly back to the presentation, and there's a portion about location of meetings, and this kind of relates to something that our absent board member had. I think she had spoken to the Long Beach Press Telegram about the accessibility of this facility for people, for disabled individuals, because of that door and other factors like the way the chairs are set up. And so, according to this, it says that a meeting may not be held in any facility that prohibits the admittance of any person based on ... which is inaccessible to disabled persons. So I wonder, earlier I had asked about calling into a board meeting and participating in that way. And so if there is difficulty renovating this facility to be more accessible to people, would that option for people who are disabled to call in be a substitute for that? And would that exempt us from violating that part of government code?
Yeah, so ADA compliance is actually something that's specifically called out in the Brown Act. Basically, in order for this to be truly open, it has to be open to anybody, which means that you can't have literal physical barriers for people to be able to get in. And if you are wheelchair bound and the only way you can get in is through steps, that's a problem. If you are hearing impaired and there's no way to provide you with some sort of text explanation of what's going on, that could be a problem. Now, a city and a public agency can't anticipate every potential possible special requirement. Under the ADA, you are obligated to make reasonable accommodation, which emphasis on the word reasonable. I mean, reasonable in terms of physically possible, reasonable in terms of cost, reasonable in terms of in comparison to other less burdensome alternatives. So obviously, having a phone option is very helpful. To the extent that individuals have very specialized needs that just can't be anticipated, usually what we suggest is on your agenda to have a contact number where people can reach out to staff ahead of time. They can get a sense of what that person's accommodation is, what sort of accommodation is needed, and then the appropriate remedy can be made.
All right, so if I'm hearing you right, then given that we do offer different alternatives for people to participate in this meeting, and we're looking at offering a new alternative for people to participate, we are in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act at this time with our facility.
Well, that's probably going beyond what I can't guarantee that. I mean, there could be things that we're just not seeing. So,
okay, yeah. But thank you.
Yeah.
Let's continue. I'll have more questions after we continue.
Okay, Ms. Stewart?
I have one more question regarding social media. If someone during your campaign was harassing you and you block them prior to being elected, do you have to go back and unblock them?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a tough question. I mean, a lot of it depends on the nature of the harassment and whether it's credible, where it's a credible threat versus somebody.
If I had a friend that was in second grade that I'm no longer friends with before election and blocked them, and she wanted to now make me unblock her, could she?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just quickly going back to that, that's why it's recommended you start a new page for just campaign stuff, and then you can leave your personal page and keep everyone blocked as you want.
Absolutely. It's a learning lesson, but thank you so much.
Of course. Okay.
Maybe in there, just note, in the old one, note that I'm no longer looking at this, so that way.
This page is
inactive, yeah.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we'll continue on to cover the Political Reform Act. When you become a public servant, the public gets to learn a great deal about your financial lives. California voters established some of these disclosure requirements when they approved the Political Reform Act in 1974. Those entering public service sacrifice a degree of their privacy. The Political Reform Act is enforced by the FPPC, the Fair Political Practices Commission. There's an enforcement division that covers audits, investigates, and prosecutes. Then there's a Legal and Education Division, which gives advice, training, and education. And the statute of limitation for violations is 5 years, but it can be tolled with probable cause report, tolling agreement, or if the intent to conceal is found. Section 3 is the Public Records Act. Briefly, are there any questions with regard to the duty to report? It was a really brief section. Okay, last is the Public Records Act. The Public Records Act will be, under that, will be covering the purpose, the what, who, and how of a record, the duty and timing to respond, exemptions, and penalties. The purpose of the Public Records Act, which I'm just going to refer to as the PRA, not to be confused with the Political Reform Act that we just covered, is a fundamental right of access to information. Access to information concerning the conduct of the people's business is a fundamental and necessary right of every person in the state. Government records shall be disclosed to the public upon request unless there is a specific reason not to do so, and the general policy under the PRA favors disclosure and transparency. Kind of like what we did under the Brown Act, we're going to start very basic. What is a record? That includes any writing containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business, prepared, owned, used, or retained by any state or local agency, regardless of physical form or characteristics. A writing means any form used to record information by a public agency, such as text, email, social media, paper, audio tape, videotape, CD, DVD, fax, computer, hard drive, etc. For example, this meeting is a public record. And also your Form 700 is a public record. Not all written information is a public record, so some key hypotheticals to ask. Is a document something normally kept by the agency in the general course of business? Is a document purely personal in nature? Does it memorialize an official transaction? And is it merely temporary, reflecting only a step in the process? So for example, a draft. That is not a public record. Who can make a record request and how is it made? Any person or entity may inspect or receive a copy of identifiable public records. How they may be made is requests can be made in writing, phone, email, fax, in person, etc. The request must be reasonably described in an identifiable record, but if the request is not clear or is overly broad, the agency must still assist the requester to make the request more clear or less broad. The agency is not required to create documents or lists. Many times we'll get a PRA request and it's for something that is in somebody's head and they want to just write it down, create a record. There's no requirement to do so. There's no requirement to ever create something to respond to. This is only for documents that already exist at the time that the record request is made. Okay, so the duty to respond. The agency must respond to a public record request. A response does not equal production of records. The PRA only covers the timing of responses, not production. Within 10 days of receiving the request, the agency must notify the requester whether the records will be produced. In unusual circumstances, if you're unable to determine when records will be produced in the initial 10 days, you have a 14-day extension to respond. This just means within 24 days at max, you have to let the requester know when they will receive their records. It does not mean you have to give the records, it just means you have to let them know when they'll receive them. Or if they don't exist, within 24 days, let them know they don't exist and you close the request. And just, again, even if the record does not exist or if it's exempt from disclosure, the agency must respond. So you don't just get to close it just because it's not a disclosable record. The PRA, again, has no timeline for when you need to produce records. There's no precise definition. It just says promptly, so as soon as possible. However, agencies may not delay or obstruct the inspection or copying of public records. So with regard to responses, you can either disclose the record, withhold the record because of exemptions, or the public's interest in not disclosing is clearly outweighed by the disclosure of the record, or you can disclose the record in a redacted form. Above are some of the most frequently used exemptions under the PRA, so preliminary drafts, notes, and memoranda, we mentioned that earlier, documents related to pending litigation, private personal information, people's street addresses we don't typically give out, personnel records, medical records or similar, investigative security and intelligence information, privileged documents or exempt by some other statute, and then there's a public interest balancing test catch-all. So these are all reasons why we would withhold something under the PRA. It is not the only reasons, though. It's just the most commonly used. Are personal accounts and devices subject to the Public Records Act? Yes. In 2017, the California Supreme Court case held that communications by public agency employees regarding agency business through personal email accounts, cell phones, and computers may be subject to disclosure under the PRA. So the court's objective in this case was to prevent public employees from hiding communications from disclosure under the PRA by using their personal devices and accounts. Very simple enough. Somebody was thinking that they were going to hide something by using their personal emails, and this is to prevent that. So we have a responsibility to conduct searches reasonably calculated to locate responsive documents. The penalty for improperly withholding documents under the PRA includes civil action for injunctive or declaratory relief or writ of mandate to enforce the right to inspect or receive a copy of any record, court costs and attorney's fees, and just a reminder, the district may never initiate legal action and preemptively have records declared non-disclosable, and we cannot collect attorney's fees.
If I may, there is a key takeaway, I think, on the Public Records Act issue that I think is kind of most relevant to you, and that arose out of the City of San Jose decision. Up till that time, the general consensus was that any records that were outside of the control of a public agency, literally not in your file or in your server system, were not records that you were obligated to produce because you had no control. That all changed with City of San Jose versus Superior Court. So now what it basically says is any device, whether it's a board-issued device or district-issued device, whether it's your personal device, if it contains business-related communications of any sort, it is at least presumptively a public record. It may not be a disclosable public record. There may be a privilege that still applies, but it is in play as something potentially disclosable. So I think the takeaway here is, to the extent you have different devices, it's probably a good idea to keep your business communications separate from your personal communications. Not that your personal communications would be disclosed, because they would be presumptively non-responsive. It's only city-related business. But sometimes things get out. Sometimes things you don't want to get out accidentally. So it's very important that you keep them separate. That said, it's also one of those things, don't ever put anything in writing that you wouldn't be proud to say publicly, because those can come back to bite you. I've had situations where elected officials get into dialogues with members of the public via text. They say some unkind things, and next thing you know, that's on somebody's website. Board member so-and-so was criticizing me in this very unkind, unprofessional way. So you want to save yourself some embarrassment in that.
Can you speak to how if somebody wants to request a public records app on somebody's phone, how does that process look?
Yeah, so here's the challenging part. We as staff have an obligation to approach you and say, we've received a request for communications related to some particular subject. We think you may have those either in your district-issued device or your personal device. Now, the district-issued device, I think we can usually access because the district controls it. It's district property. Your personal device is a little trickier because none of us here is deputized to come to your house, knock down your door, pry your phone out of your hands, and then break into it. We can't do that. So there is an element of an honor system here. All I would simply say, though, is that when you're texting people or emailing people, there's somebody on the other end who got that. And you don't want to misrepresent that you never sent a text to somebody and then later find out that that other somebody has that text. So it is incumbent upon you to try to be as candid as you can be on that. So.
Would it be your recommendation for people to use a device specifically dedicated to their office?
Yeah. And in fact, so what I've seen some officials do is, even though other people have their personal phone, they will have like an automatic reply that says, for business-related queries, please, direct it to this phone, so that it just keeps things separate and avoids embarrassing outcomes. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Staff is subject to the same rules, correct?
Yeah. I mean, theoretically, somebody, I suppose, could approach the DA and have a judge command you to release your phone if somebody really believes that there was something business-related there that you're not disclosing. But that's a bit of a hurdle. So.
Can I ask, is there a natural break in this? Just for a 5-minute break?
If there's need for a bio break, absolutely. Yeah, that would be good. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I drank a lot of water today.
Yeah, sorry. 5
minutes, please. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We are reconvening at 7:35.
Okay, before going to Form 700s, are there any questions with regard to Public Records Act section?
Yeah. So during the presentation, there was a line that said that documents could be released but redacted. How is there an amount of, like, the district can't, or a record can't be redacted to the point where it's practically
Like there's no
indecipherable?
point in releasing
Yeah.
it at a certain
Yeah.
point. Yeah. So that would be a gauge that usually legal counsel would say if we have to redact 99% of this, then we would withhold it. However, if we know that they want that 1% that is releasable, then we would release it. So it also would go back to what the requester's asking for and how they asked it. It's very specific to the language that they use.
I imagine it would be a very case-specific thing. I was just wondering if there was a kind of a standard for how much gets redacted, but it sounds like it's the case. So thank you.
Yeah.
It really depends on how much of what's stated is actually privileged. I mean, if you're talking about somebody's personnel record with all sorts of evaluations, that's going to be a very heavily redacted document.
Okay, that makes sense.
Bless you.
Would how specific would a public records request be? Like they couldn't just say, "I want to look at your phone," right? It'd be specific.
Oh, so you're asking specific about the phone issue, or?
Well, no, like if they wanted like something, they'd have to have a specific intention, like a narrow scope of what they're looking for, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of a constant struggle because we get requests that are very meticulous, written by attorneys that define every third word, so it's very specific, and then you have requests that are written by very regular non-lawyer people who maybe speak in very broad terms. Under the Public Records Act, we have a duty to kind of work with people. We can't just simply say we don't understand what you're saying, rejected. You have to make some effort to kind of understand, like when you say this, are you looking for something related to this? And it isn't uncommon for us to ask the records keepers to reach out back to the requester and say, can you provide us some clarification? Usually what we explain to them is, look, if you're not more precise, we could end up spending forever looking for what you want because we would have no specific idea what you want. And worse, we could kill an entire rainforest of documents, maybe only 2 pages of which are relevant to you. So we try to work with it. And I think the important thing is to just kind of work with people and try to understand what they're trying to get at.
Thank you.
Ms. Armstrong, do you have any questions, comments? Board Member Stewart? I actually have to. Back on your slide, duty to respond, it says unusual circumstances. Can you give me examples of an unusual circumstance?
Is this the 14-day extension?
Yes. Yes, the 14-day extension.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, for example, sometimes our documents being requested, they want something that we don't know if we have, because obviously the district has so much staff, and if they're looking for, I want a communication between this person and this person regarding this, you don't know if you have it. And if the 10 days is not enough time for you to go ascertain whether or not you have it, you need to extend, because in the 10 days you can't say whether you have it or not. So you would request an extension, or state that you're extending the 14 days, which gives you a total of 24 days, and at that point you have to make a determination. It is called the determination letter, and say, we do have it, we'll produce it to you in a week because we have to redact it, or we do have it, here you go, or we don't have it, your request is closed.
Yeah. So in instances too where stuff is off-site or archived, where it's going to take extra time just to retrieve it so that then you can look at it, that would be another circumstance. What you can't use the 14-day extension for is to just delay having to produce anything. I mean, you can set a time frame for producing stuff. Some people ask for what I like to call just file cabinet requests, where they just want everything in your file cabinet, and we can oblige them, but then they have to understand that's not going to be produced in 10 days or 24 days. I mean, that's something that could potentially take a couple of months to produce, and usually what we try to do is on a rolling basis, so at least they get stuff as we can review it. So.
And second question is, organizations able to charge for the copying fees, or how does that work?
You can only recover the exact page. So every organization should already have a page copy fee, and it should be the same for PRA. We can't charge for staff time spent compiling responsive documents, which, yes, sometimes somebody wants everything from 2010 to present, and that takes so much staff time. We cannot recover that. You can only recover the actual cost of the copy, which also you can always offer it as a PDF to save us.
Increasingly, people are asking for stuff in digital form, which is kind of a happy compromise because it really doesn't cost that much to put it in digital form and email it to somebody. So.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll wrap up with Form 700s, and that is the Statement of Economic Interest. It is subject to public record. It's subject to disclosure under the Public Records Act, filed with the clerk, and is subject to penalties for late filing. This is just a copy of what it looks like and who it applies to. It also applies to most department heads, certain mid-management supervisors, and employees. And this is just a brief overview of common reportable interest and non-reportable. I will briefly cover the reportable interest. So that includes stocks, including those held in an IRA or a 401k, business entities such as sole proprietorships, partnerships, LLCs, corporations, and trusts, rental properties in the jurisdiction, non-governmental salaries of public officials and spouse or registered domestic partners, gifts from businesses such as tickets to sporting events or entertainment events, and travel payments from third parties. Okay, and now you guys are all spared my voice and can listen to Richard for the rest of the time.
And, just to expand on the Form 700, that is sort of the low-hanging fruit of why people get in trouble with the DA, because they just forget to report everything. And a lot of times what's kind of tragic is that it's more the result of oversight than any sort of, malfeasance. So it is important to, if in doubt, over-report. If you have a sensitivity for something being reported or question whether it is truly something you need to report, again, you just reach out to us, because it can get very fact-specific. The watchdog agency that's in charge of Form 700s and some of the laws that I'm going to go into now is the FPPC, and they have very intricate regulations that are very fact-specific, and they don't lend themselves to just a quick, yes or no answer. So a lot of times if you're in doubt, just reach out to us, because you can always amend your Form 700 if you later determine that there was something you omitted or neglected to include. So just wanted to make that point. So I'm going to try to round this up, and I'm going to hopefully be sensitive to time. We're going to talk now about things that relate to how you discharge your duties as elected officials. And the idea there is that you have a fiduciary duty as elected representatives to act in the public interest and to be fair, to discharge your duties in a way that's fair and in accordance with established procedures and laws. You are not to act in your own personal self-interest or in your own bias. You have an obligation to be open. You can have opinions, but you also have to be open-minded and willing to listen. You may not ultimately agree with the opinions you hear, but you have a duty to be open-minded and respectful of others. So I'm going to go through these. The first one is probably not going to come as a surprise to you. Did you know bribery is illegal? So the idea there is you cannot, obviously this is pretty academic, you cannot trade you cannot trade your vote for personal compensation or personal campaign contributions where it's explicitly that you are only voting that way as a quid pro quo for receiving some sort of monetary benefit or any sort of benefit. So as the slide says, it's anything where you solicit, receive, or agree to receive a benefit in exchange for other actions. Here's a simple true and false question. Technically, bribery only involves the exchange of an official action of money. So unless somebody's got a bag with a dollar sign on it, anything other than that is not bribery. Is that what you would? Members of the audience, I guess you're free to chime in too. Okay, yeah, false. Yeah, bribery includes campaign contributions. It can be offering jobs. It can be offering gifts. It can be a lot of things. Anything of value or benefit, you have to be careful The penalties for bribery, I mean, that can be a felony, which means you could, if you're found guilty, spend up to 4 years in state prison. You can lose your right to hold office, and you can be barred from holding office. You can also face federal prosecutions. The FBI is in the Department of Justice are out there, and they are policing this. And tragically, we've known elected officials who have made just incredibly reckless and bad decisions, and their lives have been turned upside down as a result. And it's regrettable because some of them were otherwise good people and just made very bad judgment calls. The law that you probably are going to encounter the most in your decision-making capacity when items of business come before you is what's called the Political Reform Act. This is the overarching theme here is that when you make decisions, they should not be influenced by how those decisions will impact some financial interest you have, whether it's your salary, whether it's your property, or some of the other categories that Stephanie identified in the Form 700. But there is a four-part test. I am not expecting anybody here to remember the four-part test, but what I want you to understand is that, again, these issues can be very fact-intensive. Again, the FPPC has very specific regulations for different types of interests. There are rules, there are exceptions to the rules, there are exceptions to the rules. So a lot of it is very fact-intensive, and what I want to stress here is that the best way for us to help guide you when you're trying to determine whether or not you have a disqualifying conflict of interest is to talk to us as early as possible and to provide us with as much detail as possible, because that's really the only way that we can make any sort of appropriate analysis on your behalf. Hearing about a conflict the night of the meeting or 5 minutes before the vote, it's really hard for us to offer any sort of opinion other than to say, in an abundance of caution, just bow out, because that's really the only decision, the only sort of good advice you can give. Now, on the topic of advice, what I also want to stress to you, and this isn't a cop-out on my part, but relying on the advice of your legal counsel when you have a disqualifying financial interest does not inoculate you from penalty or punishment. The only body that can provide you with some cover is the FPPC itself, and the FPPC will, if you give them sufficient time before a decision is made, hi gentlemen, is willing to offer opinions about how whether or not they believe, based on the facts you provide them, a certain vote is one that you should disqualify yourself or not. If you rely on an FPPC opinion and a court later determines that it was not something that you should have participated in, that FPPC opinion is your golden ticket. You can rely on that. You can rely on the FPPC as the watchdog of that. So, just generally speaking, you have a financial conflict of interest if it is reasonably foreseeable that a decision will have a financial effect on the official's economic interests. So whatever the impact is has to be reasonably foreseeable. It can't be something that's purely speculative or just beyond the realm of physics or gravity or whatever. It has to be something reasonably likely. It has to be material, so it has to be a big deal. It can't be something that's just some sort of incremental, minuscule, de minimis sort of benefit. It has to be material, but again, I caution you not to make those judgment calls on your own, because materiality can get very specific, and you're better off having a conversation with that ahead of time. It has to be indistinguishable. Now, if the financial effect is indistinguishable from its effect on the public generally, that is an exception to the general rule. So it makes sense, because you live in the districts that you're making decisions in. Every decision is on some level going to impact you in some way. I mean, if you had the rule where you could only vote on things that had no impact on you whatsoever, most of you would never be able to vote on anything. So if it can be established that you are not affected in any way that's appreciably different from a significant segment of the public, and again, that gets to be very technical, what significant is, it depends on what the interest is you're talking about and so forth, then that is an exception to the rule. You can vote there. But again, it's very fact-specific and something that you really need to talk about ahead of time. Last prong is it has to be a governmental decision. It has to be something that's relevant to the business of the board. Deciding to go to Denny's after a board meeting is probably not really a governmental decision. I mean, it's a personal decision, and as long as you're not talking business at Denny's, you're probably okay. So that's, in broad strokes, conflicts of interests. I'm going to run through quickly just what sort of the various types of financial interests are. So in other words, whenever you're confronted with a decision and you think that decision might have some impact on one of the following categories of interests that you as a person may have, that's probably time for a conversation with legal counsel about whether or not it's something that gives rise to a disqualification. So businesses, if you have investments of more than $2,000 in a for-profit organization and a business position. So to the extent that there's a business entity that at some point might have to seek, some sort of approval before this body, your employer, for example, that's probably an item that you are not going to be allowed to vote on because your employer is your source of income, and that decision more than likely will have some impact is presumed to have some impact on how you would vote. Probably one of the more common conflicts that we encounter is people's real property interest, and that is most of the time it arises because it's your home. You live in the district. You have to live in the district. You couldn't be on this board if you didn't live in the district. That's a separate crime in and of itself. But there are some presumptions that the law makes. If your property is within 500 feet of some sort of project or some sort of decision, it's presumed that you have a disqualifying conflict, no ifs, ands, or buts. If it's between 500 and 1,000, there's a rebuttable presumption. So again, this is one of those things where you have to have a conversation with legal counsel because there are a whole lot of factors about how the decision might affect your income-producing capacity of the property or its property value. This comes up a lot. This is sort of out of context here, but planning commissions for cities, they're always making decisions about development projects, and necessarily planning commissioners live close to many of the projects that they are voting on. So there are instances where they can't vote because they're simply too close, and it's just presumed that the effect of the project will have some sort of disqualifying impact on their property. Anything above 1,000 feet, presumptively not a conflict. As I said earlier, sources of income. If someone has provided you or promises you more than $500 or $90 in a prior month, so that more often than not would be your employer, but it could be other sources as well. That's potentially something that could be a disqualifying conflict if the person who is the source of that income is coming before this body to seek some sort of decision making from the body for their benefit. Another common area are sources of gifts. I mean, as elected officials, people are lobbying you a lot. People oftentimes want to present elected officials with gifts, and that's one of those areas where you have to be very, very, very careful what you receive, because many times gifts can be a very common source of disqualification, especially when they're not disclosed and they exceed the $590 limit that's indicated in the slide. The more nebulous category is personal finances, and I can just describe that generally as that's kind of a catch-all, so that's a little more of an intricate analysis. But basically any decision that comes before you that has the potential to hit you in the wallet is something that you want to have a conversation about whether or not it's potentially something you could be disqualified on. And, what I want you to understand, too, is that, just because you have a disqualifying conflict doesn't mean you're a corrupt person or you're a bad person. The law just creates these guardrails that people have to stay within, and, it's just presumed that if you have certain interests that are of a certain value and that affect a decision in a certain way, you're asked to politely sit it out. Again, doesn't mean you're a bad person. So here's the kind of the crucial dance that you have to follow if you've concluded that you have a disqualifying conflict of interest on some sort of governmental decision that's coming before you. First, you must, technically speaking, identify what that interest is from the dais. You are required to disclose that. You have to step down from the dais. And so this is the distinction between recusal and abstention. A lot of people will tell me, oh, that's okay, I'm just going to abstain. And they'll sit back in their chair and cross their arms and say, we're good, right? No. Abstention means that you're still part of the quorum. Abstention means that you're still potentially part of the deliberation on the decision. So that means that you're still using your influence in some way, even though you're not voting or pressing the button, you're still involved. So When you have a disqualifying conflict of interest, you must recuse yourself. And recuse literally means you got to step off the dais, you got to leave the room, and you cannot be part of the decision making at all. You are out of the picture, basically. Your colleagues are the ones who are left to make the decision. You should confirm, as the slide indicates, that you have left the room. You want to make that abundantly clear. Sometimes the only record you have are the minutes, and you want to make sure that the minutes properly reflect that you left the room. There is this exception, which I caution people against. There is this idea that you can still come as a member of the public to speak on the item in narrowly about how it might affect you. That is an exception. It's not one that I counsel people to make, because it's just so easy once you're up here and you're talking about something, you're going to cross a line invariably, and you might start getting into the realm of improper participation in the decision, because your colleagues know who you are, they know you're part of the body. So I discourage that quite a bit, and more often than not, there's always some other person who can usually make the points you want to make for you, which doesn't require you to have to go up there at all. So penalties for failure to disqualify yourself or to recuse yourself from a conflict of interest, that it could invalidate the decision. So that's a bummer for your colleagues, because some decision that they thought was final now has to be redone or undone in some instances, and that can get very messy depending on what the decision is. So bummer for your client, for your colleagues. It is a misdemeanor. Like bribery, it could result in you losing office. You could pay fines, attorney's fees, and of course, what newspaper headline would be complete without some byline of an elected official who did something wrong? You don't want that to be you. You never want that to be you, because that follows you to the end of your life, and it's just not something you want to deal with.
Who would initiate those actions if somebody violates?
That would usually be the DA or the California Attorney General. They're both authorized to file charges for violations of the conflict of interest laws. So, this is kind of a topic. I mean, I'd like to go on to 1090, and maybe after 1090, because it's kind of a cousin to the conflict of interest rule that I just articulated. 1090 is actually a law that predated the Political Reform Act, the four-part test that I did. It's specifically related to interests in contracts. So the idea there is that you cannot vote on a matter a contract that you have an interest in. So if you're a car dealer and the contract is to approve the sale of cars for your dealership, guess what? You probably shouldn't be voting on that, because you stand to gain directly. Now, where 1090 is a lot more draconian than the Political Reform Act is that recusal is not an option. It is not enough for you to recuse yourself if you have a 1090 violation and it doesn't fall in with one of what I'll get into, some certain exceptions. Your only choice at that point is you either step down as a board member, or you forego the contract. And even if you step down, there is some time period where you would still, arguably, the board would be prohibited from acting on that decision. So you want to keep yourself out of 1090 problems as much as possible. It is a criminally chargeable offense, and it is one that people get in trouble with more often than not. So I'll give you a hypothetical here. School board member Howell owns a large parcel in the school district. The district is looking to purchase land for a new school. School board member Howell sells the parcel below market value to a property developer when he sells it to the school district. To be safe, board member Howell abstains from final decision on the property. Now, what's wrong with that? I mean, he's selling it at a loss. The district they'll never get a better deal than that. Should he be able to vote on that? Is that a 1090 problem? And the answer to that is yes, it is a 1090 problem because he obviously has an interest in the contract. 1090 does not care whether the deal is a good deal or a bad deal. If it affects you in any way, it's a violation. And as I stated earlier, it is not enough for you to recuse yourself. You cannot participate, and your board cannot participate even if you were to recuse yourself. So big takeaway from 1090. Now here's where 1090 can maybe bail you out. This is very specific, and I don't even think this is an exhaustive list of there are a number of exceptions to 1090. Some are called what are called remote interests, which means that you've got an interest, but it's kind of attenuated enough that it really, you can't really be imputed to be doing anything wrong by participating in the vote. And then there are just things that are declared to be non-interests that are just, that you may have it, like if a salary from a governmental employer, for example, is one exact. A government is a nonprofit agency. Nobody's really profiting. That's usually something you're able to vote on. But in remote interests kind of make the 1090 problem a little bit more like the Political Reform Act, in that you can recuse yourself from that, and then your colleagues could vote on it. But you need to be very careful that you fit into one of the couple of dozen specific, very fact-specific categories that allow it to be declared a remote interest. And then non-interests, again, and there's like about 15 or so enumerated non-interests. And again, if you can fit into there, you can participate. Now, there is this thing called the rule of necessity, which occasionally comes up. I don't know that I would apply it in the 1090 context that often, but sometimes, let's say you're this comes. There are some decisions that a board has to make because it affects some person who has some right to have a matter disposed of or addressed by a board or by whatever body is responsible for addressing it. You can't, as a board, just abdicate that right. To use a city example again, if a developer comes with an entitlement project, they have a right to have somebody make a decision. The board can't just simply say, you're going to be in limbo forever because we can't make a decision, because we don't have enough people to put together a quorum. So there is this idea called the rule of necessity, which says that in limited circumstances where some decision is absolutely necessary by some number of you, essentially what you would do is you draw straws, and even though you might presumptively have a conflict, you would be allowed to vote. Never take the rule of necessity decision on your own. It has a lot of pitfalls, but it is out there as a possible solution in some very, very limited circumstances. Let's see here. How are we doing on time? Okay. District contracts with a private firm to perform district employee drug testing. After an employee is in a traffic accident, drug testing must be expeditiously completed, but only drug tester available is School Board Member Smith, a doctor who serves on the school board. The only other qualified testers are too far away to ensure the accuracy of the test results. So this is a situation where, as I said, there's a mandate to do something. You can't not do something, but in doing something, you're sort of setting somebody up for a potential problem. So it said, with the rule of necessity, the one that I just got through talking about, allow the district to pay the School Board Member Smith for a going rate to complete the drug testing, this mandatory action that has to happen. And the answer is yes, and that is, at least according to the Attorney General. Whenever you see Ops Cal Attorney, that's the California Attorney General who is allowed to issue written opinions, kind of like a court. They are non-binding, but they are highly influential. So at least in the eyes of the Attorney General, who would be a prosecuting agency, they are saying in that narrow context that would be okay. But again, these are not guesses you want to make on your own. You want to talk to people about it, preferably with a lot of time. As I said, here are the sort of draconian effects of violating 1090, the no interest in contracts rule. You can be barred. The district is barred from entering the contract, even if you were to theoretically recuse yourself. It just can't be voted on. Contracts made in violation of 1090, they are void and unenforceable. So it will have been a whole lot of effort for nothing, because the contract will, as a matter of law, just be considered an invalid contract. Good faith reliance on us, legal counsel, applies across the board, really is not a defense. I mean, we will try to give you the best decision, but we are not deputized to provide you with immunity if the answer is wrong, or if the law just simply changes or is interpreted differently by the courts. Willful violation is a penalty, minimum $1,000 fine, state prison. You can have to disgorge whatever profit you made, or from the proceeds of the contract, and it is a lifetime disqualification from holding office. So very, very severe, a lot more draconian than the conflict of interest rules. So do you have any questions on this before I go on to this next segment of slides? Bearing in mind that I probably cannot answer very specific, like, do I have a conflict of interest questions, because that would require me to ask you a lot of personal questions that you probably don't want to be asked in a public room. So, but if not, I can move on. Or if you want to hold them till later, we can do that.
Anyone have a question?
Yeah. So I want to talk now about something called the Levine Act, and there was very recently a very significant change that was made to the Levine Act. So the general rule on the Levine Act is that you cannot participate in a decision for which you received campaign contributions, not contributions to your personal finances, which are a distinct category. So this is probably one thing where I want to back up. The Political Reform Act distinguishes between money you receive for your own personal benefit versus money you receive as part of your campaign. They're considered to be two separate things. So money you receive for your campaign may not necessarily trigger a disqualifying conflict of interest on the financial side. Very fact specific, but it depends. So the general rule on campaign contributions for the longest time, and to this day, is that if you receive anything in excess of $250 for any participant, anybody who's basically coming before you for some sort of approval or entitlement, you as an official are disqualified from participating. Now, the good news for elected officials for the longest time was that if you were acting in your capacity as a member of a body that you were directly elected to by the people, so if you were on a school board or a city council where the only way you can get there is being elected, you were exempt from this. It didn't apply to that. That has now changed effective this year. So now you are in the same boat as everybody else. So what that means is when you do receive your campaign contributions, which you were entitled to do, you're acting in the political world, you have to fund your campaigns, but you do have to be careful about how accepting those funds could down the road affect your ability to vote on a matter. And that might be something that people who are offering the money to you might want to consider as well, because it does them no good to give you money and then you're not even able to vote unless they have other reasons to do it, which actually they shouldn't be giving you money for that purpose alone. So that's just the key takeaway there. That is something you need to be attuned to now. Was something that you didn't have to worry about for a long time, but effective this year, that is the new rule. So now I'm going to talk about what's called fair process. So there are instances where you guys are responsible as a body for making decisions where you're sitting in the capacity of like a judge. You're an adjudicator. It's what's called in a quasi-judicial capacity. So, what you're doing is you're applying the existing rules to some specific set of circumstances that somebody who is petitioning this body needs adjudicated, whether they violated a policy, whether they're entitled to a permit, whether, whatever it could be. When you sit in a quasi-judicial capacity, just like a judge, you have a duty to be fair and impartial. You cannot bring your personal prejudices or your biases factor into your decision-making. You cannot make up rules that aren't part of whatever the established criteria is, either to favor or to hinder somebody who's petitioning you. You have to adjudicate the matter based on what the applicable facts or the applicable law is and what the facts are. You have a duty to be impartial. You have a duty to hear all the evidence from both sides before you offer an opinion or make a decision. The reason for that is that if you are spouting off about opinions about how you're going to reject that application and it's never going to pass you, you're at risk of being disqualified for bias, because the applicant will say, well, there is no point on this board member participating in this vote. They've already decided they don't want to hear the merits of my case, and they may not even want to apply the law that they are required to apply to. So when you are acting in that capacity, where you're acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, similar to some of the advice we were giving to you earlier, you're going to have people who off the dais are going to lobby you, petition you, want to persuade you to see things their way. You can listen, and I suggest that you only listen, but then you make it clear to that person that you are not at liberty to offer any decision at this point, and that you will reserve judgment on the matter until you've had a chance to hear all of the evidence, both for and against, on your matter when it comes before the body. And you might even want to stress them that that you also want to make sure that you're not disqualified on the basis of bias. So that is the big takeaway there. I mean, here are some forms of common law bias. They are distinct from financial interest because you're not necessarily profiting from it, but maybe you're benefiting in some other way. You're a member of the Kiwanis Club, and you want to make sure that your club beats out, the Rotary Club. So you're going to be biased on some decision. I mean, that may be an instance where, you're not gaining financially, but you're obviously not being fair and impartial to another body. Personal bias. I mean, there are many times you guys are confronted with decisions where, you have some strong personal opposition to what's going on in general, but you have to, basically be willing to suspend that and apply the law to the facts. And the one example I like to give was we had a public agency client that had to approve a halfway house in a city. And the halfway house had to apply for, I believe it was something called a conditional use permit, which has its own criteria. And if you meet that criteria, and you can reasonably show the facts that you meet that criteria, the body has a reasonable responsibility to perhaps grant it to you. But halfway houses are very unpopular. Surprise, surprise. And unfortunately, we had a lot of decision makers, though, who didn't. There were ample ways to kill the project on its merits, on its facts. But a lot of people just wanted to grandstand and just say, I will never allow a halfway house in my community. We have too many. And, those may all be very valid concerns, but they are not pertinent to the decision. And what was frustrating is that there were reasons rooted in the application process that could have been invoked and could have formed a basis for declining the project, but they were never mentioned on the record. And what happened is when the developer did appeal the matter, went to the court and said, hey, these guys just totally blindsided me. They were making decisions not on the criteria. The court agreed with them, and the city had to approve the project in the end. So a project that they probably could have legitimately rejected if they had just stuck to the proper criteria. So that's just a little detail. The last one is factual bias. This gets back to this idea that you should make your decisions based on all the input that you get. You shouldn't just close your ears to one side and just say, I don't want to hear what the other side has to say. You have to be open to receiving all the information. What you do with it once you're on the dais is obviously up to you, as long as you're acting within reason, but you want to avoid factual bias as well. As I said, there are certain risks. Creates the risk the decision could be set aside, if there was just an extreme showing of bias here. If the violation rises to the level of a denial of due process, that actually can have constitutional ramifications, and there are special federal laws that provide penalties for people who violate people's civil rights and constitutional rights. You are allowed to have philosophies and opinions. I mean, you can have general philosophies about issues, but you have to make sure that those don't cross. When you're making an adjudicatory decision, you have to make sure that your philosophies are not unduly overriding your ability to weigh a matter based on the law that's applicable and the facts that are applicable. So easy for me to say, maybe a little harder to do in practice. So this is sort of the distinction between legislative and quasi-judicial. When you are making legislative decisions, basically what the rules are going to be, you're allowed to be a little more partisan there. I mean, you campaign on issues, and it is okay when you're talking about broad policies that will apply to everybody equally to have, I think, more fixed opinions, more fervent opinions about that without getting in trouble. You're allowed to have an opinion about what the course of the district should be and what sorts of policies would best serve the district. But once those policies are in place, you have an obligation to follow them and to apply them consistent with the way they were established. We are, I think, only a few slides in. This is claiming perks of office. This is pretty basic stuff. All the little goodies that you're provided as an elected official, whether it's a phone, access to offices, in some instances, support staff. All those resources have to be in the service of your discharge of your duties here as elected officials. You cannot be using city resources to fund your to support your real estate business. You can't have staff people picking up your dry cleaning or handing out flyers for your hot dog stand or something. That is a misuse of public resources that are not for their intended purpose. This kind of touches back on some of the issues we were talking about earlier with conflict of interest and reporting. Oh, yeah. Do you guys want to wrap it up? Yeah. Do you want to take questions now, or? I think we're. Look, I'll just be succinct. When it comes to resources that are provided to you, you need to use them for city-related business. You cannot use city-related resources for your own personal gain or for your own personal benefit. These things are provided to you and made available to you to discharge your duties. And you have the slides there. There are civil penalties for misusing resources, whether it's money or staff time or other resources. There are also criminal penalties as well. You cannot make these resources available to third parties. That is a gift of public funds. You cannot reward your friends by giving them public benefits or your allies or whatever. It has to be in the service of a public purpose that's defined by this body as a body, not individually. Again, you want to safeguard your reputation. That is probably the single most valuable thing you'll ever own in your life, so it is important to preserve it. And here are some resources for getting additional information, and I will zip it at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Myra, I have some questions.
That's not proper.
I have some questions, just, because it's at the end. Did you have some questions you want to go first? You got some questions. Okay, so just in all of this information,
yeah.
So say, for instance, I'm a member of some club, and my club wants to have a meeting. Now, we have facilities that we let, maybe Girl Scouts use or whatever. But if I wanted my club to have a meeting, and I could possibly use like maybe a school where it's it's allowable. I just make a request to use the facility. But what if I wanted to take advantage of our live streaming capabilities? Would I be able to use my club for those purposes?
So. Yeah, well, first of all, you have to be able to use it on the same terms that are established for everyone else. So if there is some process for allowing clubs to use facilities, use equipment, as long as you are availing yourselves of that on the same terms, you're not getting preferential treatment just for your club, that is permissible. As my colleague to the right indicated, there may be some instances where if it's for your own, your personal benefit, there may be a requirement to pay for certain resources. I mean, it's if you are using city facilities and we charge, if you or public agency facilities that are normally charged for to third parties, you would similarly have to be charged for that. You couldn't have that waived just for you unless there's some established process and objective criteria for waiving it. That would be the only way. So.
That would be a no.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah,
Thank
okay.
you. I had another question. As a board member, can I be violating the Brown Act if I kind of like take on some administrative roles, kind of come down and just try to intervene and be real personal with maybe a principal on a campus or even maybe a teacher? Would I be violating the Brown Act if I kind of step out of my role as a board member to where he's my only employee?
That may not be a Brown Act violation per se, so much as it is a sort of a violation of the chain of command. I mean, you're allowed to have relationships with people that are, have nothing to do with the job. You may share an interest with a principal or a certain staff person. They may just be a longtime personal friend. You are allowed to have friends. You are allowed to be a normal person in the world. What you can't do as an individual board member is sort of usurp the authority of both the board to set the course and to make policy and the prerogative of the executives to implement that policy. You cannot take it upon yourself to sort of, take over that role for your colleagues here. I mean, you as a council can certainly make decisions about things like that. The superintendent has some discretion subject to your oversight to make decisions like that. But as far as having relationships with people and, just wanting to understand their point of view, wanting to understand things that are important to them, these are all things that are informative to you, that might inform your decision making. And I would encourage you to kind of reach out to people. You can't direct them and you can't promise them anything as an individual. So.
Excellent, thank you. I think you answered one of my questions already, which was, and you can elaborate if you want to, as an elected board member, that I represent all constituents. Again, how do I protect the district and the board and my board when individuals bring complaints to my attention?
This
reiterate.
is very common. You're elected officials. You are the first line of contact that the public has. The public doesn't often know those of us who are kind of behind the scenes. You guys are the ones who shop at the same grocery stores they go to. You're the people who maybe went to high school with a lot of these people because you grew up in the community. You are allowed to receive those concerns. I mean, I would submit that you'd be kind of derelict in your job to just be blind to them, and it probably wouldn't even be prudent for your prospects for re-election. However, once you receive those complaints, I think your obligation is not to single-handedly go out there and cite somebody or try to right some wrong. You need to work within the process. My first suggestion would be contact the superintendent, explain to him what has been conveyed to you. Perhaps it's something that he can resolve at the administrative level without having to involve the full board. If it is something of bigger consequence, then it may be something to bring to the full board for a more larger policy discussion. But I understand. You're elected. The community puts a lot of expectations on you to make things right, to make things good. They want you to be responsive, and I get that. I don't know how you guys do your job, quite honestly, because it's a 24/7 job. But you just have to be careful not to overpromise or overstep, because that's when you can get into problems.
So lastly, I do want to thank you for providing all the examples of the Brown Act and conflict of interest. You gave us a lot of examples. So I do appreciate that, and who knows, I may be asking for more examples in the future.
Yeah, please. We are at your disposal to talk. I mean, obviously through the superintendent, but we want to be a resource for helping you avoid pitfalls if we can. So,
Board Member Stewart, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Sure, I have one more. So we talked a lot about Brown Act, obviously, and then we mentioned at the beginning like ethics, and I'm just curious. This may be on topic, off topic, but when it comes to boards' ethics and violating board bylaws, how does that fit into accountability, and what's the best way for a board to address those issues and move forward?
So that comes up a lot too. So board bylaws are not necessarily the laws of the state. You don't go to jail for violating a board bylaw. They're not state crimes, but they are the rules of this body, and this body has a right to ensure that you follow the rules that are set. So typically, the body's avenue for policing those kinds of violations, the most common is what's called censure, which is basically a formal slap on the hand. It doesn't really have any consequence. Nobody on this board can remove you from office. The only people who can remove you from office are the voters if they recall you, or if you lose at your next election, or if the DA throws you in jail and you're not able to be in office. But censure is an option. Some bodies might penalize a violator by depriving them of committee opportunities. You're not entitled to be on a committee. You can have that revoked from you. So there I know from the perspective of the public, they might seem like slaps on the wrist, but there is kind of limitations to what you can do. We can't remove you. We just can't. This board cannot do that. However meritorious some people may think of that as to be.
And one more, because I mentioned that in the Green Act and Brown Act differences. I know we have committees that follow the Green Act as opposed to the Brown Act. Are you familiar enough to
You
give
know,
us like a
I
summary?
got to ask you, and I'm just going to come clean. What is the Green Act?
So,
Yeah.
Dr. Dottie?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's more of a liberal
Okay.
Brown Act, but I
Okay.
guess that's the easiest way I could explain it.
Did
But
you
we
make
do-
it up? Did I just sound silly? It's called Green Act, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it is a Green Act. So,
Okay.
yeah. So we, I think to his point, there. Can you speak to board commissioned committees that are subject to the Brown Act? Standing
Oh,
committees.
yeah, yeah.
Because
So
I know they have like posting requirements and
Yeah.
have certain things.
So there are every public body like this usually has what are called standing committees, which are made up of some less than a quorum number of your members. Because they are standing committees and presumptively part of the larger vetting and deliberation process, the thought is that under the Brown Act is that, well, you know, the workings of those committees should be open to the public as well. And in many instances, there are a lot of bodies where a lot of the big decision making is made at the committee level. You know, a lot of stuff never rises to the level of the full body because it gets resolved or agreed upon at the committee level, and what gets presented to the board is maybe not the full picture. So the idea is that if you have these standing committees that have this indefinite term, they too are subject to the Brown Act. You have to make them open to the public. You have to have an agenda. It doesn't need to be an elaborate agenda, just enough to let people know what issues you will be addressing. And you know, that is the case. Now, where you don't have to are what are called ad hoc committees, and I don't know if that's a practice you have, but an ad hoc committee, as its name suggests, is a committee that's of finite duration. It's usually created just to solve a specific problem, and once that problem a recommendation is come up with and presented to the board, it goes away. Ad hoc committees, as long as they maintain those qualities, do not need to be open to the public. They are not subject to the Brown Act. The problem is that sometimes bodies create ad hocs, and they keep going and they keep going, and they get other tasks, and their mission grows, and they effectively become standing committees. So that's the thing you want to be on the alert to.
It's really about the furtherance. If the committee is commissioned by the board so that way the board doesn't have to deliberate the whole time with it, but they commission a group to do it. Then they have to live under that.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, you guys are confronted with a lot of different issues. Some of you have subject matter expertise in some things, some of you don't. You need sometimes people to focus, you know, specifically on an issue so that they can kind of digest it for the full board and present it in a way that will allow you to make informed decisions. So yeah, I mean, ad hoc committees are not, they are very helpful, acceptable things, as are standing committees. So.
Just to be clear, so the say safety citizens task force is what I'm referring to.
Mm-hmm.
So is that a Brown Act? Is it under the Brown Act? Can somebody help me out?
I don't know what it does, so I guess I need to.
So the Citizens Task Force is a group that has appointed people. So each one of our board members appoints a member to be on that.
Okay.
City Council appoints somebody, and each one of our school sites appoints somebody to be on that committee.
Okay, and it's of kind of indefinite duration. It's not
annual.
It's annual. I mean, if it's continuous and it just has this sort of ongoing authorization, even if it doesn't really meet all that frequently, I mean, I would argue that is subject to the Brown Act, specifically since it's including other public agencies now, and it's kind of taking on more of a regional flavor. Right? That would be my
So
sort of
the understanding is that the Green Act oversees sort of like District English Learner Advisory Committee and Citizens Task Force. That's what our understanding was.
Okay. I don't know if that answered your question, but this sounds to me like a standing committee.
I'm
of
more
sorts.
confused now.
Right.
Okay, sorry.
It's all right, Brad. I found the Green Act. I found it. It has about eight bullet points, and I just emailed it to to myself. So you're not crazy.
Yeah. Email it to me too, please.
And yeah, but I know what you're talking about. Like, I'm on one of those committees, but I'm with LOXTA, LA County, School Trustees Association. Now we operate under the Brown Act and parliamentary procedures. That's how we operate. It's a nonprofit, and so that's how we operate.
Yeah.
I wonder if the inability of the Citizens Task Force to actually take any decisive action has anything to do about whether or not it's subject to the Brown Act, because they just give recommendations that are brought forward to the board. The board's actually a legislative body that's making decisions on things, but the Citizens Task Force just reviews, like for example, textbook materials, and they tell the board, we like this textbook, and then it's up to the board to act on it. So that's why I imagine they're not.
What you're describing to me sounds like a standing committee. Like they're part of your larger decision-making process. They're part of the conveyor belt of decision-making, and it doesn't sound like they're going any way, and it doesn't sound like they're, set for some finite. It sounds to me like a standing committee, but maybe that's an offline conversation that we need to have, so I can better inform myself about what they do.
Anyone else? Questions, comments? Okay. I do have a question. So currently, I am the sitting board president, so I have access to you and the lawyers, and I can also go through Dr. Drati. So next year, I will not be board president, but I do have a question about how maybe something that I am engaged in, outside of the community, would affect any deliberation going on the dais. How do I get in contact with you, or should I? What's the process?
So different public agencies have different approaches. I mean, some are very lax, and council members can just call us, and we'll field questions, or public agency members will call us, and we'll field questions. I know, in the interest of containing costs and just making sure that attorneys aren't burning time on things that maybe the board as a group isn't too interested in us burning time on, I would always go through your superintendent first, and if it's consistent with whatever your board policy is, and if it's something that isn't going to be unduly burdensome, we'd be happy to help. I mean, we're happy to be available to you, however available you all as a body want us to be. I mean, and a lot of times problems can be avoided when you have early conversations, and we can ask a lot of questions and chew on things and give you better advice that way. So.
And that is just due to perhaps our own board policy that we have in place. But we can always go back, and if we need to amend it.
Yeah. I mean, how accessible you want to make legal counsel is kind of a policy decision for you, and different agencies approach it differently. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you speak to the importance, the way I see the bylaws, and particularly the bylaws, or basically the social contract that we have with the board members to operate amongst themselves, and also with the staff and the community and all that. So can you speak to your experience of when we don't follow the bylaws, what happens to the organization if bylaws aren't followed and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, just broadly speaking, I mean, when you don't, when there's no common understanding of what the rules are, I mean, that's usually the first step in boards and bodies becoming dysfunctional, because it sort of erodes trust. There's a feeling that people aren't playing by the rules, and so people then, will make up their own rules to get their way. So it's really important, to adhere to the bylaws. It's also very beneficial for staff, because you're 5 bosses who may not always want things a certain way, so you meet as a body and you try to build consensus. But if you have 5 different people giving 5 different pieces of direction outside of a meeting, I mean, that can be very frustrating and consternating for staff. And on the personnel level, I mean, the more you involve yourself in direct engagement and management, where the bylaws perhaps prohibit you from doing so, you're also at risk of creating workplace issues as well. I see a question. There's a.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh,
Point
okay.
of privilege. Thank you.
No. It sounded like there was a question or.
Oh. He wants to be excused just for a minute, so he's asking for permission to be excused,
I don't
so
know.
he can come back. That's all. Point of personal
Point of
privilege.
privilege.
For him.
Okay.
Granted.
I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yes, thank you.
I just had a comment. I believe there's a board bylaw that says if someone was going to go talk with the lawyer, they had to have a majority and it had to be voted on. Can you guys confirm that?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's important to know, because we don't want to get you crosswise with your own bylaws. So, yeah.
I can confirm.
Okay. I have two questions. One for her. Ooh, say it, don't spray it. One, just a comment. I mean, just a comment. So she stated that she has access to you all. Does that mean that we don't have access to you all?
That is a bylaws question, which I don't know what your bylaw says.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna check what the bylaw says.
Okay.
I mean, the previous boards probably wrote the bylaw to do something. We just have to look at that and I think I was just thinking right now, just through Friday memo or whatnot, I'm gonna start pulling bylaws of some pertinent things to just continue to make sure that we're always in front of us, seeing what the rules are that we establish. And if we want it different, it's a matter of you guys voting and changing it.
Yeah, in the, again, sorry, Brad, past practices to where, like, if we did have a concern or that we needed legal counsel, we would go directly to the superintendent to express our concern, and either the superintendent would take care of the concern for us and bring it back to us, or we'd have whatever kind of meeting. My question would be answered, but that's how it has been in past practice. Yeah. We always go through the superintendent. So yeah, we have a big book of bylaws that really do need to be reviewed. And my question is, like, say for instance, if we do have another town hall. Okay, so we did have a town hall. You notice you had several questions. It was kind of confusing the way because we had an issue that we needed for our community to come together. So the setup was kind of confusing because it was actually supposed to be basically a staff meeting to bring the community together. And when I say the setup was confusing, we had our board president sitting up there with the panel. But we had and then the board members along with the staff sitting on the side. So it was confusing. Is it a staff meeting or is it a board meeting? To where, because if our president is sitting up there, she should have been running, at least she should have been running a meeting, but it wasn't a meeting. It was a town hall. So in certain ways it needs to be.
You want to avoid that kind of ambiguity, and I think a gathering like that starts to take on the attributes of a meeting when you guys are starting to talk to each other and share opinions and kind of reach consensus. Then that's really more of a meeting, and if you didn't post an agenda, that's potentially a problem. Town halls are good. My thought is that it is better that when you do have town halls, that you maybe take more of a backseat role and be more active listening and really let them be more staff driven. It doesn't mean that you're not engaged. It just means that you're avoiding any ambiguity.
To be more specific, this is it can happen anywhere, right? We have meetings all the time where I have board members there, right? So this happened to be a town hall meeting in which I needed law enforcement, I needed principals, different people, all the different constituents there, and I had the board president speak on come speak representing voice from the board, the board and all that. So that way the community sees that we have a coalition of people supporting this situation. The goal there was not to have board members speak to it, but just to listen and gather information. But if, let's just say, one board member speaks and the second one speaks and the third one speaks because the feeling that, well, if I don't speak, it may look like I'm not being responsible. Then I guess my tutoring everybody is saying that would be a board meeting if 3 people spoke. Because we didn't. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fact specificity that's needed there. But I mean, the more it starts to look like you're deliberating and maybe even decision making, and you didn't agendize it as such or agendize it at all, I mean, that starts to take on the attributes of a meeting. And I know it's hard because I mean, you don't want to seem like you're apathetic to what's going on there. But I mean, maybe it's just a question of making clear at the beginning of the meeting that you're not there to comment because we want to avoid.
Well, could I add? And for the record, I'm not against all past practices. But one of the rules, and I think we kind of started the meeting off with the rules of the president. That's one way to avoid Brown Act violations by the president speaking on behalf of the board.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, if you're there strictly as like a moderator or an MC, I mean, that's, you're not there running a meeting. It's important then that the rest of you, though, not do or say anything to make it start to look like a meeting.
Right. That way, the board still has a presence and a unified message.
Right.
They're communicating without that.
She could be your designated representative
Exactly.
at that meeting. Yeah.
I guess we can look at the bylaws on it, right? The role of the board president, vice president. Because the question becomes in play is that if the board member or president or whoever is speaking on behalf of the board, the question becomes, should we have deliberated on that beforehand before we sent the person to speak on behalf of the board, or can we charge the president to speak on behalf of the board in situations where we can't just continue to have deliberations?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say you're probably better off just being more of a moderator rather than a, statement maker, I guess.
Yes, and I believe that our board bylaws with regards to our roles, because when our board member Armstrong was president, she presented those to us and reminded us of our roles. So that actually was what I was doing in that case. So just to be very clear.
Okay. All right, well, are you sick of me now, or are you ready to send me home?
Very thankful.
Okay.
Question is not necessarily for the board, because the board knows about these rules, but as I mentioned earlier, this conversation is for the public also. Now that sometimes people don't know the rules of engagement, and they may unfairly charge the board for something. So often there's, and not just in this place, but other board meetings, you will have public come speak their piece, which is they have the right to, but they'll bring up issues that we deliberate in closed session that we cannot respond to. And sometimes these things are emotional.
Yeah.
And when board members are sitting there, it doesn't look good that they're not responding on this thing that they're hearing.
Yeah, I mean, that's tough.
What's a good way to communicate that? They can't really respond to this, but
I mean, I mean, you as the chair could do it. I personally prefer to take the heat off of you, and maybe either the attorney, probably the attorney, can just simply emphasize the reason why they cannot respond to commentary. I mean, they're listening. I mean, you can there's nothing that says you can't listen to what people have to say. You just can't discuss what was divulged in closed session unless you as a body make a collective express decision to waive some privilege, which you could do theoretically, but not advisable all the time.
Well, we actually do have a board bylaw that speaks to it. As a matter of fact, board member Armstrong brought it up initially when I entered the board about 2.5 years ago. Yeah. So we did go over it, and I think you can just provide it for us so we can have a refresher on it.
It might not hurt, too. I don't know what your agendas exactly look like, and you don't want to overload your agendas with a lot of information, but you might want to have some admonition there that just says that there are some items you cannot comment on publicly. So
our president can definitely disseminate those pieces to us again. Refreshers are always good. It's for real.
Thank you for
thanks. You guys have been lovely.
Both you.
Yeah,
thank you. It's great.
Have a good night. Thank you.
You too.
Yes, we still have to continue the meeting. We'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. So let's go over to our next item of business would now be approval of minutes.
Point of order, can we go back to public hearings?
Sorry, I thought we had already gone through that. So we do not have public hearing this evening. Now the next item of business is approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve agenda item 8.1.1, approval of minutes, April 6, 2023, regular meeting?
Yes, you have that motion.
Second.
Questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Board Member Mendoza,
Aye.
Ms. Armstrong,
I have to abstain. I was absent.
Ms. Stewart,
Aye.
Mr. Critchfield,
Aye.
Mrs. Garza.
Aye. The next item of business is consent agenda. Does the board have requests to withhold an agenda item tonight?
Could we withhold item 8.3.3.1, course matrix?
So I make a motion to approve consent agenda and withhold agenda items 8.3.1.1.
Second.
Oh, sorry. One more. There's one more in there. And 8.3.3.1.
Second.
Questions or comments?
What are the two numbers again?
8.3.1.1 and 8.3.3.1.
Okay, thank you. No questions.
Questions or comments? Are those wrong? Right? That's correct? Okay. Thank you. So questions or comments? Then roll call, please.
Board Member Mendoza,
Aye.
Ms. Armstrong,
Aye.
Ms. Stewart,
Aye.
Mr. Critchfield,
Aye.
Mrs. Garza.
Aye. Withheld items. The next item of business are the items that have been withheld from the consent agenda. The first agenda item withheld tonight is agenda 8.3.1.1, calendar Board of Education meetings. Do I have a motion?
I motion.
Second.
Dr. Girardi, do you have information on this item?
Yes. My apologies, but I keep looking at this calendar and just events that are coming. So there is a change I need personally because my timing of some of the events I wanted to do this spring has been pushed back. So I want to make an adjustment to the calendar. I propose that we cancel first of the May 17th meeting because there's too many meetings in that 1 month. So and then change the May 25th meeting from a board retreat, which is my personal change, to a regular board meeting. And I'll talk to you about retreat happening after my listening tour. The retreat occurring in the fall instead of actually in the summertime.
Any questions or comments?
Just for clarification, you want to cancel May 17th and
Yes.
have the meeting on May 25th?
So, yeah, the meeting is already on 25th. We're just going to cancel May 17th altogether and change the May 25th, which is originally scheduled for a board retreat, to a regular board meeting.
Thank you.
I have one comment. We've talked a couple times about including a study session into our future meetings. Is that something that we would designate an already scheduled meeting, or is that something that we would bring on the agenda, say, next time and schedule from there?
In your Friday memo, you will have a macro calendar of all the different topics from here over to August. And so in there, you'll see some items are under study session, some are under discussion, some under action. But there's several things like next board meeting. We actually probably have to start a little early because there's a bunch of study session items that we're going to bring to you.
For clarification, when we say study session, we're not talking about a separate dedicated meeting for that thing.
No.
We're saying...
Yeah, so a reminder, we treat study sessions as there's action item in which we bring a discussion to you in which we're going to ask you to vote on something. That's called an action item. There's this discussion. This is something that we would discuss, deliberate with you, and then get direction, knowing that it's going to eventually turn into an action at some point. And then study session is just more information about some item, that we're going to talk about, and we'll have possibly future implications on decisions we're going to make. But it's more just information giving you. So we call it a study session in that sense. The retreat is we treat that as when we are actually having a dedicated special meeting. The arrangement may look different because that's when we're going to either do board 360 evaluations or you want to do a deliberation. Some of the plans I have for quarterly reviews of data in which we will have principals and other administrators, different people come talk about what's happening at the school sites and all that. We're going to, my idea is that we're going to arrange, that's also going to have a different configurations. So there will be times for retreats, but the study sessions, action items and all that are going to be on a regular board meeting. But the focus of those conversations are going to be different because we're going to be asking for different things on those in those meetings. I'll put something on Friday meeting just as a reminder of what I mean with the sequence of events are.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. So roll call, please.
Board Member Mendoza?
Aye.
Ms. Armstrong?
Aye.
Ms. Stewart?
Aye.
Mr. Critchfield?
Aye.
Mrs. Garza?
Aye. The next item withheld tonight is agenda item 8.3.3.1, course matrix. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the course matrix.
Second.
Questions or comments?
Yes, I have a bit to say about this item. So, starting off, I opened up my board book, and there was this humongous list of classes, and I took some time to go over it, and it gave me a lot of food for thought. So, to begin with, for as long as I've been a secondary student in BUSD, one of the primary things I hear from students, and I agree with myself, is that students need more electives, students need more classes that they can take for original credit. They want more classes that are related to very specific fields that they'll go into later in their careers. And so when I opened up this matrix and I saw a list of some really amazing classes, that was the first thing I thought of is, how long I've been hearing students ask for, different classes, more creative electives. And so I think to start off with, I'll list off some of the classes that I read in the course matrix that I have personally never heard of before being offered in Bellflower. So we have Gothic literature, creative writing for high school students, women's studies, African American history, Holocaust studies, world religion, AP Euro, archaeology, astronomy, veterinary science, oceanography, and Latin. Those classes sound amazing. Unfortunately, I just have never heard of them before. So to begin talking about how students hear about those classes, we have to understand the process of signing up for your classes as a secondary student. So how it works for middle school students and high school students, and I take it this is the same at Bellflower High School as at Mayfair, is that you get a form towards the end of the academic year, and it has a list of all the possible classes you can take, and then you rank those classes like your electives, 1, 2, 3, which are your priorities, and then based on how many students sign up for them, only a few of those classes will actually be offered for that academic year. And I'm all for that system. I mean, that makes sense. You don't want to have a class where it's just one student in it for you because they're the only one who wants to take that particular course. The issue is not all of these courses that are listed in the course matrix are offered on that list. And so I guess I wanted to ask about, some points of clarification for what exactly the course matrix is, how it works. Based on the description at the very end of the board book, it says that it's something that comes before the board every year, so I'm sure some of you guys on this body already have experience with it. But as far as how does a high school make a request for a new course goes, and what are those requests based on, I think I'd like a little more information about how the course matrix works.
I'll answer that for you, even though you've been on the board for a very long time, some of you. So the course matrix is, you're right, it's going to include all of the courses that we've had here in Bellflower. So it's basically a listing of all of those and then the course number that goes with it. It could be for different schools. So it could be Los Flores has a variety of classes that the students are taking. It could be Mayfair, it could be Bellflower, it could be CalAPS courses as well. It's just any course that we would provide here. So if there was a school site that wanted to add a course to their listing, there'd be a variety of things they would think about. They would think about whether it's they could get it A through G approved because they would have to submit the course through that process. If they have staffing for that as well. And then, as you also already mentioned, is there student interest in that? So there's a few things that go into it. And then there's a process for them to submit that course to be requested to be added.
I thought so. The course matrix includes courses that have been offered in the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that makes sense. So then, I think one of the things that comes to mind is I already knew about before I was on this board, and I learned a little bit more about this kind of issue once I got here. But like the courses that are offered at Bellflower and Mayfair are different. Like right now, Bellflower has driver's ed, but they don't have Mandarin. Mayfair has AP Psych, but we don't have Avid, which Bellflower does. And so then there are different opportunities for taking courses depending on which school you go to. I had a friend who took a women's studies class over at Las Flores. And so you could only take women's studies if you were a student over there. It's just something that came to mind, was that I would imagine courses like African American history would be extremely popular if they were at, Bellflower and Mayfair. Those would be very popular classes. And so I would anticipate a high demand for them. And I don't imagine, it would require too much additional staffing because then, another course would be, swapped out for that. Something that comes to mind is, as far as, when you offer a course, you need to have a curriculum for it. You need to have some kind of book for it. Does that mean that we have had curriculums and books for this in the past? I mean, I know marketing doesn't have a physical book. That's a class I took last year. We have a PDF that we use. So is there at least a PDF for some of these classes?
It depends on what you're talking about, but what I'm hearing you say is that there may be an interest for something like the Women's Studies course, right? And then is there already curriculum for that since it was on our course matrix? One thing to think about with Las Flores is some of the classes that they take are online. And so they're going to be taking that with a teacher and the curriculum that goes along with that. They pay for that course. So it's not to say that that's something that we have curriculum for at the other schools because that's the independent study school.
Oh, so that curriculum is exclusive to Las Flores?
The Las Flores students could take an online course.
Okay.
And that would be a paid-for course that they would do for their independent study.
I see. Okay, so it's kind of like how dual enrollment works with like Cerritos or Long Beach City, in which high school students can sign up to take those classes, and the district just covers it, right?
Similar.
Okay.
Similar.
Okay.
There is curriculum for dual enrollment classes, though, too. So they are similar.
Yeah. I had written down something. Yeah, so I know there are definitely courses that students have expressed interest in the past. Like, almost everyone I've spoken to says it would be so cool if we had an ASL class. Like that would. I think we even heard a little bit of that at the Superintendent's Advisory Council meeting yesterday. So as far as the course matrix goes, if we could do more, research into getting some of these classes that, surveying students. Giving them that list of the course matrix and saying, which courses would you be interested in taking? There are some classes that aren't that popular at Mayfair. I imagine there's some classes that aren't that popular over at Bellflower. So maybe if we give them this course matrix and say, these are courses we've offered in the past, would you be interested in taking Holocaust studies or in taking astronomy or veterinary science? Then maybe they could express interest beyond that form you get just every year to sign up for your next year's classes. So if that's something, I don't know if I can just ask staff to do that, but if that's something we could at least look into.
Well, it's definitely something that would happen at the site level because they're going to collect the interest from students in what the students are interested in taking at the school site and then developing, if it is a development of a new course, then they could look into writing that course up and getting it A through G approved. Many of these courses on here, I wouldn't want to give a list to you of courses that you may not be able to access or take because it was an online course like the Las Flores course. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I appreciate the desire to share with the school sites that there's probably more courses out there that kids are going to be interested in taking, and that's something that we can let our school sites know.
Yeah, it's just, I think on a kind of a, tying this back to the idea I introduced this topic with is students would like more classes that they could take, things that are more specific to a career field they're interested in. I know we have our CTE program, CalApps, which is incredible for students who want to do things that are a little more hands-on. But as far as academic, kind of very specific courses, I think maybe if we could do a better job of making dual enrollment easier for some students, because that's something you can do over the summer. It's a way you can make up original credit over the summer. And I know we have our summer school programs at Bellflower and Mayfair. But that's usually for making up credits. It's not for making up original credit.
And we do actually have dual enrollment right now for original credit during the summertime. It is part of a grant funding, though, so it's something that we've only done over the last couple of years, and Ms. Azevedo is making that available to students.
Yeah, it's about getting the word out to people, and then also making the process easy, because I spoke a little bit about this at the Superintendent's Advisory Council meeting, and I think you might have heard Diego say it too. But signing up for these is a big headache. It's a lot of work. You have to get a permission slip, and you have to take it to the office, and then you have to create your own portal with the college and everything. And then it's supposed to be our counselors who give us help in signing up for those classes, but our counselors are already working, extremely hard as it is. So I think maybe if we can look into giving more support for students in learning about the dual enrollment classes and actually signing up for them, then that can relieve some of the student desire for new classes, new electives.
Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, and then obviously the board does have the authority to establish grad requirements. So if, for example, if the board decides to say we want everybody to take women's studies before they graduate, you have the ability to do that, and to do that. Now, there's consequences of forcing people to do something. You got to consider those things. But I've seen it where districts say we want our students to be able to do this, this, and that, and you respond to it. Aside from the board saying, streamlining, saying these are the expectations that everybody takes these courses, like English, math, and all that, certain levels of math and all that. The other courses are going to be more the flavor of what the student body. So you get stuck in terms of, let's just say we have Mandarin in one school. We hired a teacher who teaches Mandarin, and all of a sudden next year everybody wants German. How do you address that situation? Because you don't have a German teacher, you have a Mandarin teacher. Yeah, so that's just an example of how complex these things get. Because I'm so glad that we have the 8th period day in Bellflower, now we have it in Mayfair also. I think that's going to open up an opportunity to expand more of those kind of courses to give to students. So just a lot to think through. I'm excited to go talk to people out there and talk to students about what they want in the next 3 or 4 years in this district in terms of curriculum and all that, because that's going to help me inform when I have that final retreat with the school board about, hey, this is what I've heard, this is what I think we'll try to do. I want to be able to express some of the things, some of the ideas of the kind of curriculums that we want to see. Anyway, there's a lot, there's potential here. We just have to kind of get together and discuss those things.
Yeah, and on that particular example about having a Mandarin teacher, and then the next year everyone wants to take German, we had a similar problem this year over at Mayfair in that not enough, I think we had people sign up for AP Stats, AP Statistics, and a good amount of students showed up on the first day, but then we realized we're in the same room as people who just wanted to take basic stats, and then the counselors came in and announced that AP Stats was canceled for the year, and we had to wait another semester before we could take dual enrollment stats with Cerritos College. And so for that first semester, we did basic stats. So I think that, I guess, planning ahead and making sure that, maybe this is more at the site level about setting up courses for the academic year. I guess it is. But yeah, I really like the dual enrollment programs. I think they're a great way for students to make original credit. So if we could do more to support those, that'd be great.
I had a great meeting with Cerritos College today with all the different other superintendents that partner with our college, and I think I have one coming up with Long Beach City College as well. They are really interested in expanding dual enrollment, so I was able to represent that. Both high schools now have 8th period days. They can help us out with that. So, like I said, there's a lot to talk through around that.
Thank you.
Board Member Armstrong, any questions, comments?
Yeah, I found again the matrix interesting, and I do understand that Los Flores, our home study has a different curriculum, and that's why if you choose that path, then you start that path and you complete that path as opposed to being in the school and going through the curriculum at school. I also noticed, again, the women's studies, the African American study, the Holocaust studies, and all of that stuff. But what I didn't see, and what I would love to see in the future, because we've been talking about it for years now, is ethnic studies. Are you all researching that?
Yeah, so we're currently researching that.
Thank you. I'm glad to know that because that is going to encompass a lot. Ethnic studies is so empowering. It is. So I'll be glad when that comes to fruition.
There was actually another workshop today that our staff was at, and so we're gathering all that information. We'll be working on it mostly next year. There is that law that's in place that needs to be, that class needs to be part of graduation requirements, to Dr. Dratti's conversation that he was talking about here. And we're going to have to be looking at our graduation requirements for a variety of reasons. So that'll be coming forward in the future year.
This is going to be exciting. It's emotional, it's empowering, and it's going to give our students the boost they need just to see, what contributions came from all over, from all different types of people. So I'm excited. That I didn't see it, but I know we've been working on this, so I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Board Member Stewart.
I just want to say thank you for bringing us that, to the attention, because I also, when I looked at this, I was talking with my daughter about, wow, this is amazing. Look at all the courses that were offered. So I definitely did not understand what this was either. I have a few questions. When was the last time that we surveyed the high schools on classes that they would want to take?
I believe that's a process that the school sites do every year. They currently actually bumped it up earlier this year, and they were talking to students in January, February time, because that's what they need to do. They go out, they talk about the courses for next year, they get feedback from kids as well. The students turn in interests.
So on that form, all of these classes are listed on that form?
Not all of the classes, because they're not all for that school. So on that list is courses for our entire district. And so each school site has something called a course catalog. And what they do every year is they update that course catalog, because that needs to be provided and posted on the website too, for parents to know and for students to know. And it has a lot more detail on each one of these courses. And so sites specifically, they start that process in the early spring, February.
Okay, so if I'm hearing correctly, all of the courses that are offered at that particular site are on that form for them to be surveyed.
On that interest form, that's my
understanding. And is the interest form the same form that goes out where they choose numbers of which one they want to take?
You're getting into specifics. My understanding is that and if Chris, you can feel free to explain your experience, but my understanding is yes, they go and they give their priority on classes.
I guess
because then they have to create the master schedule.
I don't think I'm making myself clear. So what I'm understanding, or am I not understanding, is there's a survey of the courses that they're interested in, but then there's another form they fill out for what they would like to take. Are there two different papers?
Yeah, so the first thing I talked about was something that you do to form your schedule for the next year. So you get a list of all the classes that are offered at your campus, and you choose from those electives or from those requirements. You choose which level of requirement, like if you want to take AP or honors, and then you pick 3 electives, and then you rank them. That is how you pick your classes for the next year. As far as a form, like a survey that goes out about which courses you'd be interested in taking, I don't recall ever having taken one of those surveys. It might be offered, I just must have missed it, and I don't recall any of my peers receiving one of those surveys either. So we'll have to, maybe it could be part of a different survey, like those wellness surveys that we get, but I don't recall getting one of those.
Maybe let me just restate it. It's the same document that goes out. So the course interests, say at Mayfair, they'll list all the Mayfair courses. They may not be able to offer all of them. All right, so they'll say, okay, there's X amount of students here, and these are all the courses that's available for Mayfair, and Mayfair. And then students start populating all that, and then the counselors pull back and say, well, we can offer these courses, not too many people picked it, so we're not going to offer it this year, and we're not going to offer it this year. So that's how that works. But to say, let's open it up for, I want to take blank, just some vast number of courses, that chances are that's not going to happen, because logistically it'll be almost impossible with our teacher credentialing and everything else to ensure that we can offer some of those courses. So now, in my listening tour, for example, I'm going to go talk about concepts for education and curriculum that I want to see people react to it. And if community comes out and say, yes, we love these things, and I'm going to go to the principals and say, look, it seems like the community wants this thing. I'm going to come to you and say, do we guarantee this, that everybody does this, or do we make this an elective? And then all of a sudden, those courses make the list. So it's pretty complicated in building a master schedule in that way. So the start has to, you look at the students, you have to look at what they have to take, and then what they have to take, we have to offer. And then how else do you feel, what are your interests? And the interests come from the fact that the previous courses that we've offered already. In the meantime, there'll be teachers there, department chairs, if people come and say, oh my God, I wonder if I can teach women's studies with an emphasis on blank, 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 and they sometimes write curriculum for that, but they would have polled people on campus and say, what do you guys think? Would you guys be interested in taking this? If people say yes, then they write curriculum, bring it to Bonnie, you guys approve it, and it makes it on that. It makes it on that list. Now, once it's on that list, that whole list goes to a students. What do you rather take? And if students don't take that course that I just added, then we don't offer it. It's there, though, but we don't offer it. Right? And so that's how the whole...
My district is currently going to block schedules, so I understand, and they're checking all of the credentials and things like that. I guess what I'm hearing is we've never surveyed our students on what they want to take, have we?
I think what I'm hearing you say is that like an open a survey of what other courses might you want to have.
Correct, because my question is, how do we pick what's on that list? That was my original question, is how do we pick what's on the ones that they actually put the numbers that they're interested in? Who chooses that?
You mean on the list at the school site or on the course matrix?
The school site, when they choose 1, 2, 3, I want to take this, who decides what classes are on that list if we're not surveying them?
It's going to be the courses that would be, that they've got for their graduation requirement, and it's going to be the courses that they know that they've got staffing that are doing those electives. So it's going to be the courses that are in their course catalog already, and that their kids are able to take because they already know that they have staffing for it. What I'm hearing you say is there another survey where we could say, do you want to take women's studies, African American studies, those kinds of things?
Yes.
I think, and I appreciate that. I think the hard part of that might be is that course created and A through G approved at that school site, because remember those courses were Los Flores, so they were online, but also the staffing that is credentialed for that to be able to do that course or build that course or be trained for that course. So I think that would be some of the reasons that we would hesitate in giving a long list to kids. My understanding too would be that our counselors would be that like front line of hearing from kids of what their interests might be, and they work with the assistant principals over curriculum at the comprehensive school sites. So they would be able to give more of an input to APs about this is what I'm hearing kids are talking about, and maybe have those conversations amongst themselves.
And before I weigh in again, I want to check in the other two board members. Do you guys have anything to ask or comment on? Okay. So yeah, I hear what both of you guys are saying, in that you're interested in, and I think a lot of students are interested in having a blank space of like, what kind of course would you be interested in taking? And then maybe someone probably 50% of everyone would say ASL. But another point I'd like to make clear is that you also talked about who decides what gets to be on that list, right? Like who decides what gets to be on the list that's offered. Like you have to pick from these. And there is some confusion there, because I know in the past when I was in 8th grade, my 8th grade teacher had told me that there used to be a creative writing studies offered for exclusively 12th graders, and I noticed that it was on the list for 12th graders. There was creative writing, but then there wasn't enough interest in that course a particular year, and so it was canceled. And to my understanding, the staffing hasn't changed since like in the English department since that course got canceled. But the course was never offered again, and it never showed up on that list. So I think that's why there's some confusion about who decides which courses are offered to students, and which courses students would be interested in most.
In the district office, they have, like in HR, they have a list of your credentials and what you are allowed to teach. So that can be done. That's why I was asking, if we surveyed prior, asking, what they wanted, we could determine, who could teach that and what was possible.
I do have a question of staff. Is there a way that we go through this list and kind of clean it up at every end of the year, or is that something that we can't do perhaps, or just so that we are up to date with what we are offering our students. So that way I love the fact that we have these, but is there a reason why we still continue to have them after years of not having these teachers be able to offer those classes?
I would say somewhat to Chris's point in that if there was at some time in the future a teacher that wanted and had the credentialing to teach the creative writing class, we wouldn't want to take it off of our list. We would want to just be able to say that we've got the course and be able to program kids into that course.
So it's like a space holder, and we don't have to go through the trouble of adding a course and going through the whole process.
Resubmitting, all of that, getting it A through G, all of that. Yeah, we wouldn't want to cancel a course out and take it inactivate it off of our list.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because that makes total sense why we have such a long list.
Because those courses are also a part of the clearinghouse, the college clearinghouse, because they have a listing of all the courses at Mayfair and Bellflower High. So when we apply for colleges and all kind of stuff, there's a matching of, okay, did they take a legitimate course here? You know, back in when I was in LA High, I remember, you know, when things weren't that tight where people were just abusing athletes, they would just get basket weaving in. All of a sudden you're in college somewhere, and all that stopped because now you don't just create any old course to give a grade to. You have to have an agreed. And so all those courses that are approved by you guys and all that, that sits in course matrix, the college clearinghouse also has access to that, knowing that we have these courses.
Stewart.
President Garza, is there a list somewhere, or can we request a list of the classes we actually do have available for our students?
You know, that's a really good question. Dr. Drati, is it possible to make just like a separate list? I know we don't want to add list upon list upon list, but just so that
I would think it would, I'm sorry to interrupt, I would think it would be the course catalog for each one of the high schools.
Yeah.
Okay, so at the website, like online, it would have those course catalogs.
Absolutely.
And then parents would be able to see which courses.
And they update those annually, so they'll have those for the next year. They'll put them up there.
Thank you for explaining that.
Absolutely.
And lastly, I think just to wrap this up, I think to speak to a point that Board Member Stewart had brought up, if we could find a way to study our course matrix, find courses that could potentially be offered based on our teachers' credentialing, and then identify those, even if it's just 3 or 4 courses that could possibly be offered, then to pose those to students and say, would you be interested in taking a course like this? And then that way we can offer it for that next academic year. And then the thing is, we talk about a course being popular one year but not being popular the next. And that's okay if that happens. But also I think, when students take a course, they tell their friends, you should definitely take this course next year, and then people sign up for that. So I don't know how common it is for a course to appear and then die. But definitely if we could do some kind of study about which courses we could potentially offer and then pose that to students to get their feedback on, I think that would be pretty great.
Yeah. And I think the people that can really speak to this is going to be the principals at the high schools and the counselors that build the schedule. They're intimately connected to what the students are saying, not saying. So if you guys would like at some point I could invite them to explain how the whole process works. It's
that would be great.
For somebody leading a high school, building a master schedule, it is complex. It's not that easy to say, let's offer these courses. If you react this way, there's a response to your reaction, and you always gotta consider that. A simple thing as the ethnic studies. And I was a part of the whole debate with ethnic studies, and Santa Monica, Malibu was the first school district to adopt ethnic studies as a grad requirement. But I avoided that conflict because I turned the U.S. history into ethnic studies, and so everybody took it instead of forcing people to take a course and dropping the course they would have taken otherwise, because that would have just caused all kinds of conflict. So there are ways to address these things, but you got to do it in a methodical way. Otherwise, meddling with people's schedule and what they think is, you're talking about people going nuts. It's just, so so we got to be very careful about the course selections and forcing students to take certain courses or not. Those things are sensitive. So as those initiatives come up, we're going to have to implement ethnic studies because that's what the state says. How we do it, I got some ideas on that. We're just not in a place to talk about that right now. We're going to try to avoid conflict as much as possible. But Bellflower Unified is set up to be successful in implementing some of these courses because of the 8th period day, more than other districts. So, that's a good thing.
And just as a form of more clarification, parents need to understand that those courses are on the websites, and that depending on the courses that are offered at each of our high schools, middle schools, that they need to be selective as to which school they decide to go to, correct? Because some courses, for example, if my son is very interested in art, it may be offered at Bellflower, but not maybe in Mayfair, and that wouldn't be the deciding factor of which school I decide to apply to.
Well, especially when you're talking about CTE pathways, because there are different ones at each school site, and there is the Art Academy at Mayfair, and there's automotive and early college at Bellflower, so there are differences at both of our high schools, and that would be a permit process, depending on, right, if they're not going to go to their own home school, then yes. And all of those things are online. The course catalogs are actually quite detailed, so you also have the CTE pathways that are in there, so the parents would be able to read through those.
Thank you, board members. Thank you, staff. I'm so sorry.
I have one more question since this item got pulled. I had talked about a 7-8 PE class. Now I'm not sure that this is even something that we do because I thought these were all courses we offered. But do you know, are there any combination 7-8th grade PE classes? It's listed on page 21, and my concern is if there are, we test FitnessGram in 7th grade. So if there's 50 kids in a class and a teacher has to test for FitnessGram all of her 7th graders, what are those 8th graders doing? I just would like you guys to maybe look at that and maybe on the Friday memo provide if we do have 7-8 combo PE classes.
Yeah, why don't you let me look it up? I completely understand what you're talking about, so I'll look to see and give you some more information on the board memo.
Thank you.
Let me ask any other questions or comments? No? Thank you. So, could we have roll call, please?
Board Member Mendoza?
Aye.
Ms. Armstrong?
Aye.
Ms. Stewart?
Aye.
Mr. Critchfield?
Aye.
Mrs. Garza?
Aye. Informational items. Does the board have any questions regarding the informational items this evening? Thank you. It is now time for Board of Education members and student board member communications and reports. Let's begin with Mr. Mendoza.
I thought we weren't doing those this week. I thought we got a text message that we weren't doing them this week.
Yeah, I know. I thought we weren't going to do it.
We reinstated it. I'm sorry you didn't get that message, but I think that some board members requested that we continue. I was going to do it once a month, but I think everybody wants it every meeting. So
I think leaving it on, we have it on the agenda, but optional. I don't think any of us, especially in the interest of time, should feel obligated to give a full board report, but just as an option, if there is something that you need to communicate, it's good to have it on the agenda as an option.
Well, because I didn't prepare, I don't want to just ramble here, so I'll pass it off to you guys.
Well, I wasn't prepared. However, I do have this to say. On April 24th, 1915, the Armenian genocide began, and over 1.5 million Armenians were systematically killed by the Ottoman government. This atrocity was one of the first forms of modern-day genocide, and it's a dark stain on humanity's history. This was yesterday on April 24th. So yesterday, I remembered the victims of the Armenian genocide and recognized the strength and resilience of the Armenian people. I honor the memories of those who were killed, and I acknowledge the courage of those who survived. I recognize that the Armenian genocide was a tragedy of immense proportions, and its consequences are still felt today. I remember the victims of the Armenian genocide and acknowledge the strength and resilience of the Armenian people. I recognize the importance of learning our past and honoring the memory of those who were lost. I pledge to never forget the atrocities of the past and to never allow such tragedy to happen again. Again, I must also recognize the courage and spirit of the Armenian people who have persevered in the face of adversity for centuries. Despite the horrors of the past, the Armenian people have continued to thrive and build their lives, and they are a testament to the power of resilience and hope. So I stand in solidarity with the Armenian people and remember the victims of the Armenian genocide. And I just want us to work to ensure that such tragedies never occur again. And let's commit to creating a world where all people are treated with dignity and respect, and where hatred and prejudice are never tolerated. And just want to ensure that the Armenian genocide will never be forgotten. And I'm speaking this in honor of my first cousin, Lisa Markinian. That's it.
Thank you, Board Member Armstrong. Board Member Stewart.
I didn't have a board report this week. I went on vacation with my family, and I just want to remind everyone that you guys work really hard, and it's good to take breaks sometimes and go on vacation and not pick up your phone. And family is super important to me. My father and my daughter, I'm very protective over them. And so I just want to remind you guys to take breaks when you need, and that's why they're there. And I hope you guys had an amazing spring break. Thank you.
Board Member Critchfield.
Well, first, I want to thank AMLO, Rick, again, for the presentation tonight, you and your team. I also want to acknowledge my fellow board members. I think tonight's an example, and I think the community has seen how much can actually go into holding this office or any elected office, and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of stress. I'm very fortunate to be surrounded by such powerful and strong women, both here and at home. And it means a lot to me that you are who you are and that you put up with it. And it's unfortunate that sometimes the community may not see that. I think a lot of them do. But it's unfortunate when that happens because any distraction from the work is a disservice to our children. And I just want to applaud all of you for that work. And also our district, thanks for answering all my questions about past policies and practices. I really do appreciate all the work and closed and open. So thank you all. That's all.
Thank you, Board Member Critchfield. I have no updates or comments, so thank you so much. Let's go on to, if there is no objection to this meeting is adjourned at 9:27 until the regular board meeting to be held on Thursday, May 11th, 2023.